Chapter 1. Introduction. The essence of efficiency. Good evening. Settle in. Find a comfortable position. Tonight, we embark on a journey into the heart of economic efficiency, a subtle dance between production and costs. We often speak of progress, of innovation, but beneath the surface, there exists a fundamental drive towards optimizing how we create, how we deliver, and, ultimately, how we minimize the resources consumed in the process. This isn't merely about profit margins. It's about the elegant interplay of forces that shape the world we inhabit. We begin with a concept familiar to most, yet often misunderstood in its nuances: economies of scale. Imagine a solitary craftsman painstakingly creating each piece by hand. His output is limited, his costs are high, and his ability to adapt to changing demands is constrained. Now, envision a factory humming with activity, where specialized machines and coordinated labor work in concert. The difference, you see, is scale. Economies of scale represent the reduction in average costs that occur as production increases. It's a spreading of fixed costs, the rent on the factory, the salaries of management, across a larger number of units. Think of it like a river, initially narrow and turbulent, carving its way through resistant rock. As the river widens, the same volume of water flows with greater ease, its energy more efficiently distributed. Similarly, a larger firm can negotiate better deals with suppliers, invest in more efficient technologies, and afford specialized expertise that would be impractical for a smaller operation. This allows it to produce each unit at a lower cost, a cost advantage that translates into greater profitability or the ability to offer lower prices to consumers. However, economies of scale are not without their limits. Beyond a certain point, the river may become too wide, too sluggish. The complexities of managing a large organization can lead to inefficiencies, communication breakdowns, and a loss of responsiveness. This is known as diseconomies of scale, where increasing production leads to higher average costs. The delicate balance lies in finding the optimal point, the sweet spot where the benefits of scale outweigh the drawbacks. Next, we consider economies of scope, a related but distinct concept. While economies of scale focus on the quantity of a single product, economies of scope address the variety of products or services offered. Picture a woodworker who specializes only in chairs. Now, envision another woodworker who crafts chairs, tables, and cabinets using the same tools, the same workspace, and the same acquired skills. The second woodworker benefits from economies of scope. The policymaker understands this well. Economies of scope arise when producing multiple products together is cheaper than producing each product separately. This can be due to shared resources, such as a common brand name, a shared distribution network, or shared research and development. Consider a pharmaceutical company that develops a platform technology that can be used to create multiple drugs. The initial investment in the platform is high, but the marginal cost of developing each subsequent drug is relatively low. This shared resource creates a significant cost advantage. Finally, we turn our attention to learning curves. These represent the cost reductions that occur as a firm gains experience in producing a particular product or service. It's a gradual process, a refinement of skills and processes that leads to greater efficiency over time. Imagine a novice pilot struggling to master the controls of an aircraft. With each flight, with each landing, his movements become smoother, his decisions more instinctive. He learns by doing. The classical economist saw the value in this. Learning curves are often expressed as a percentage. For example, an 80% learning curve means that each time cumulative production doubles, the cost per unit decreases by 20%. This is not simply about repetition. It's about the accumulation of knowledge, the identification of bottlenecks, and the gradual optimization of every stage of the production process. The advantages conferred by learning curves are particularly significant in industries characterized by rapid technological change, where continuous improvement is essential for survival. So, tonight we've explored the essence of efficiency through these three lenses: economies of scale, economies of scope, and learning curves. Each offers a unique perspective on how firms can reduce costs and improve productivity. As you drift off, Consider this. How do these forces interact in a globalized world, where supply chains are increasingly complex and competition is increasingly intense? That, perhaps, is a question for another night. Chapter 3. Fixed versus variable costs. The foundation of cost analysis, the world of costs, at first glance, can seem a chaotic sea of numbers. But beneath the surface, a clear structure emerges. It is the distinction between fixed and variable costs, a duality that forms the bedrock of all meaningful cost analysis. Understanding this distinction allows us to predict how costs will behave as our level of production ebbs and flows, like the tide responding to the moon's gentle pull. Fixed costs. The unwavering pillars, fixed costs, are those expenses that remain constant, regardless of the volume of goods or services we produce. They are the silent, steadfast partners in our enterprise. Rent for a factory, the annual salary of a security guard, the cost of insurance, these are all examples of fixed costs. They exist even if we produce absolutely nothing. Picture them as the foundations of a grand building. They must be laid, no matter how many stories we eventually build. It is important to note that fixed costs are fixed only within a specific time horizon and production capacity. A factory can only house so many machines, and a lease only lasts for a certain period. Eventually, expansion may require a larger facility, and therefore, a higher fixed cost. The classical economist often emphasizes this stepping stone nature of fixed costs. As production increases significantly, we may encounter a higher plateau of fixed expenses. Variable costs. The flowing river variable costs, on the other hand, are intimately tied to the level of production. They fluctuate directly with the quantity of output. Raw materials, direct labor, and electricity consumed by production machinery are all examples of variable costs. As we increase production, these costs rise proportionally, like a river swelling with rainfall. If we cease production, variable costs vanish. The ebb and flow of variable costs mirrors the ebb and flow of our productive endeavors. The relationship between variable costs and output is often assumed to be linear, but this is a simplification. In reality, as production increases, we may encounter diminishing returns. This means that each additional unit of input yields a smaller and smaller increase in output, which subsequently might increase the cost per unit. The policymaker often worries about how scaling up production could drastically impact cost efficiency. The dance between fixed and variable costs, the interplay between fixed and variable costs, is crucial in understanding the overall cost structure of a firm. At low levels of production, fixed costs may dominate, making each unit produced relatively expensive. As output increases, however, the fixed costs are spread over more units, thereby reducing the average fixed cost per unit. This is the genesis of economies of scale, which we will explore in greater detail later. Conversely, the variable cost per unit may increase as we approach full capacity, leading to diseconomies of scale. Machines may break down more frequently, labor productivity may decline due to overcrowding, and raw material prices may increase due to scarcity. These are all factors that can drive up variable costs and erode the benefits of increased production. Average costs. A bird's eye view to gain a clearer picture of the overall cost structure. Economists often calculate average costs. Average fixed cost is simply total fixed cost divided by the quantity of output. As production increases, AFC decreases, approaching zero as output approaches infinity. Average variable cost is total variable. Cost divided by the quantity of output. The shape of the AVC curve is often U-shaped, reflecting the initial gains from specialization, followed by diminishing returns as capacity constraints become binding. Finally, average total cost is the sum of AFC and AVC. It represents the overall cost per unit of output. The ATC curve is also typically U-shaped, reflecting the combined effects of declining AFC and eventually increasing AVC. The point at which ATC is minimized represents the most efficient level of production, where the benefits of spreading fixed costs outweigh the drawbacks of diminishing returns. Chapter 4. Total cost, average cost, and marginal cost. A primer tonight, let us gently navigate the intricacies of cost structures within a firm. Having briefly considered the foundational concepts of production, we now turn our attention to the financial burdens associated with that very act of creation. Think of costs not as burdens, but as the necessary tributaries feeding the river of output. We will explore total cost, average cost, and marginal cost. 3 fundamental concepts that paint a richer picture of a firm's economic landscape. Let us begin with total cost. Total cost, quite simply, represents the entire expenditure incurred by a firm in producing a given level of output. Imagine a small bakery. The total cost for a day would encompass the price of flour, sugar, eggs, the baker's wages, electricity to power the ovens, and even the amortization of the oven itself. It is the aggregate of all these individual expenditures, both explicit and implicit. Total cost is inextricably linked to the level of production. As the bakery produces more loaves of bread, its total cost inevitably rises. This relationship is typically depicted graphically as a curve, usually sloping upwards, reflecting the increasing costs associated with higher output levels. The shape of this curve, however, is where things become interesting, reflecting underlying economies of scale. Now, let's consider average cost. Average cost offers a perspective on the cost per unit of output. To calculate average cost, we divide the total cost by the quantity of output produced. Returning to our bakery example, if the total cost of producing 100 loaves of bread is $200, then the average cost per loaf is $2. Average cost helps us understand the cost efficiency of production at a given scale. Interestingly, the average cost curve often takes on a U-shape. Initially, as output increases, average cost tends to decrease. This is because fixed costs are spread across a larger number of units, reducing the cost attributable to each individual loaf. However, at some point, further increases in output may lead to rising average costs. This might occur due to factors like increased labor costs, strain on resources, or the need for additional, less efficient equipment. The classical economists often use this U-shaped curve to illustrate the potential for both economies and diseconomies of scale. Finally, we arrive at marginal cost. Marginal cost is perhaps the most subtle of the three, representing the additional cost incurred by producing one more unit of output. It's not the average, it's the incremental expenditure. In our bakery scenario, the marginal cost would be the cost of the flour, sugar, and labor needed to bake one additional loaf of bread, beyond the existing production level. Marginal cost is a crucial concept for decision-making. A rational firm will continue to increase production as long as the revenue generated from selling an additional unit exceeds the marginal cost of producing that unit. The marginal cost curve typically slopes upwards, reflecting the increasing difficulty and expense of producing additional units. It's like trying to squeeze more water out of a nearly empty sponge. Each drop requires more effort. Furthermore, the marginal cost curve intersects the average cost curve at the lowest point of the average cost curve. This relationship is vital for the policymaker when considering subsidies or taxes that might influence firms' production decisions. These three cost concepts, total cost, average cost, and marginal cost, are intertwined and inform a firm's decisions about production levels, pricing strategies, and overall profitability. They are not static concepts, but rather dynamic reflections of the firm's interaction with its resource environment and its internal operational efficiencies. Understanding these cost structures sets the stage for further exploration of how firms achieve economies of scale, scope, and learning. But before we delve deeper into these optimization strategies, consider this. How might technological advancements alter these traditional cost curves? Would automation uniformly shift them downwards, or create new, unforeseen complexities in cost structures? This is a question we shall ponder as we progress further into the world of production and costs. Chapter 5. Understanding Cost Functions. The mathematical basis. Welcome back. We have previously discussed the conceptual framework of production, the interplay of inputs to generate outputs. Now, let us delve into the mathematical representation of these relationships, specifically cost functions. These functions are, at their core, a translation of the production possibilities into monetary terms. Think of them as the financial shadow cast by the dance of labor and capital. Tonight, we explore how these cost functions inform our understanding of economies of scale, scope, and the subtle grace of learning curves. A cost function, in its simplest form, expresses the total cost of production as a function of output. It might be written as TCQAF, where TC represents total cost and Q represents the quantity of output. This deceptively simple equation hides layers of complexity. What factors influence this relationship? Well, the price of inputs, the technology employed, and the organizational structure of the firm all play their part. Consider, for instance, the short-run cost function. In this time frame, at least one input, typically capital, is fixed. Thus, changes in output can only be achieved by varying the amount of the variable input, labor. This leads to the familiar concept of diminishing returns. As we add more and more labor to a fixed amount of capital, the marginal product of labor will eventually decline. This, in turn, implies that the marginal cost of production, the cost of producing one additional unit of output, will eventually increase. The shape of the short-run cost curves, therefore, reflects the interplay between input prices and the productivity of the variable input. Now, let us shift our gaze to the long run. In the long run, all inputs are variable. The firm can adjust its capital stock, its factory size, and its entire operational footprint. This flexibility allows for the possibility of achieving economies of scale. Economies of scale occur when increasing the scale of production leads to a decrease in the average cost of production. This can arise from various sources, such as specialization of labor, increased use of technology, and the spreading of fixed costs over a larger output. The classical economists often use the example of an automobile manufacturer. By producing a large volume of cars, the manufacturer can justify investments in specialized machinery and assembly lines, thereby lowering the cost per car. However, economies of scale are not limitless. At some point, diseconomies of scale may set in. These can arise from managerial inefficiencies, communication breakdowns, and coordination problems that become more pronounced as the firm grows larger. Related to economies of scale are economies of scope. Economies of scope exist when producing two or more goods together is cheaper than producing them separately. The policymaker might find economies of scope in a hospital that offers both diagnostic and treatment services. Sharing resources such as medical equipment and administrative staff can lower the overall cost compared to having separate clinics for each service. Think of it as a synergy effect, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Finally, we arrive at the concept of learning curves. Learning curves, sometimes referred to as experience curves, capture the idea that the cost of production decreases as a firm gains experience. This can be due to improved worker skills, better process design, and more efficient use of resources. The learning curve effect is often represented mathematically as a function where the cost per unit decreases by a constant percentage for every doubling of cumulative output. An aircraft manufacturer, for instance, will become more efficient at building planes as they build more planes, even if there is no change in capital, materials, or scale. Understanding cost functions, economies of scale, scope, and learning curves is crucial for making informed business decisions. It allows firms to optimize their production processes, to choose the appropriate scale of operation, and to strategically diversify their product line. It is a lens through which the modern economy can be visualized. Understanding these principles are critical to policy decision-making, and indeed, many social sciences. But consider this, while these models provide a powerful framework for analyzing costs, they often rely on simplifying assumptions. How do we account for uncertainty, for unexpected disruptions, or for the ever-evolving landscape of technology? And how do we accurately measure and predict the learning curve effect, given the complexity of real-world production processes? We will begin to tackle these questions in the next lecture. Chapter 6. Economies of Scale. Origins and historical context. Yes. We were just discussing the intricacies of cost structures and their foundational role in a firm's success. Now, Let us gently turn our attention to a concept inextricably linked to these cost dynamics: economies of scale. Think of it as a fundamental force, shaping industries and indeed the very landscape of global commerce. Economies of scale, at its heart, represents the cost advantages a firm accrues as its production level increases. It's a fairly intuitive concept, really. The more you produce, the lower the average cost of each individual unit becomes. However, tracing its historical origins and understanding the mechanisms that drive it offers a profound appreciation for its enduring influence. The earliest glimmerings of this understanding can be found scattered throughout the writings of the classical economist. He may not have explicitly used the term economies of scale, but his observations regarding specialization of labor and the benefits derived from larger workshops speak directly to the underlying principles. Imagine, if you will, a small artisan shop producing a single type of good. Each craftsman is responsible for the entire process, from raw material preparation to final finishing. As demand grows and the shop expands, the artisan can now begin to specialize, becoming incredibly efficient in just one step of the process. This increased specialization, coupled with the utilization of larger, more efficient equipment, allows for a significant reduction in the cost of each completed unit. This leads us to the first driver of economies of scale: specialization of labor. Adam Smith's famous pin factory is, of course, the quintessential example. By dividing the production process into distinct, specialized tasks, output increases dramatically. This increase isn't merely linear, it's often exponential. The focused repetition breeds skill, reduces wasted time, and allows for the introduction of tools specifically designed for each specialized task. The flow of work becomes smoother, more efficient, and ultimately more profitable. Another powerful driver is the phenomenon of indivisibilities. Some capital equipment, by its very nature, is available only in certain minimum sizes. Consider a large printing press or a sophisticated chemical reactor. These machines represent a substantial fixed cost, regardless of whether they are operating at full capacity or not. As the level of output increases, this fixed cost is spread across a greater number of units, driving down the average cost per unit. It's like spreading a thin layer of butter across a larger piece of bread. The impact of the butter becomes less pronounced. Furthermore, as firms grow, they gain access to bulk purchasing discounts. Suppliers are often willing to offer lower prices per unit for larger orders, recognizing the stability and predictability that these orders provide. This advantage further reduces the costs for the larger firm, enabling it to compete more effectively in the marketplace. Think of it as a system of interconnected pipes. The wider the pipe, the greater the flow, and the lower the resistance. The historical context in which economies of scale emerged is crucial. The Industrial Revolution provided the fertile ground for their flourishing. The introduction of new technologies, such as the steam engine and the power loom, demanded larger-scale operations to justify the significant capital investments. The rise of factories and mass production marked a fundamental shift in the organization of economic activity, allowing firms to exploit economies of scale to an unprecedented degree. The policymaker, observing this transition, understood the power inherent in these expanding industries and sought to create an environment that fostered their growth, often through supportive legislation and infrastructure development. However, the pursuit of economies of scale is not without its potential pitfalls. Beyond a certain point, a firm may experience diseconomies of scale. This occurs when the organization becomes too large and unwieldy, leading to communication breakdowns, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and a loss of control. Coordination becomes more complex, and the benefits of specialization begin to diminish. The system, once elegantly balanced, begins to strain under its own weight. As we contemplate the evolution of economies of scale, we arrive at an interesting juncture. The digital age has introduced new dimensions to this concept. While traditional economies of scale, driven by physical production, remain relevant, we now see the emergence of network effects and economies of scope. And perhaps this new landscape will create new scales to be discovered. But how, precisely, does the rise of information technology impact the optimal scale of production in today's economy? That perhaps is a question for our next deliberation. Chapter 7. Technical Economies of Scale. Specialized machinery and processes. Welcome, once again, to our exploration of the subtle dances that govern the economic world. We previously considered the broader landscape of scale economies, noting how sheer size can, in certain circumstances, yield benefits. Now, let us delve into a specific and fascinating aspect of this phenomenon: technical economies of scale, focusing specifically on the advantages derived from specialized machinery and processes. Imagine, if you will, a clockwork mechanism, each gear meticulously crafted and precisely positioned to contribute to the overall functioning of the time-telling device. That is, in essence, the promise and the challenge of specialization. Technical economies of scale arise when increasing production allows a firm to invest in machinery and processes that are more specialized and efficient than those used at lower levels of output. These aren't just bigger machines. They are fundamentally different. Think of a small bakery, painstakingly hand-kneading its dough. As demand increases, it might invest in a dough-kneading machine. But as the bakery expands further, it can then afford a fully automated, industrial-scale dough processing system, capable of producing far larger quantities with less labor and greater consistency. The nature of the production process has changed, not just its volume. This transition hinges on the concept of indivisibilities. Some pieces of equipment simply aren't available in smaller, scaled-down versions. A steel mill, for example, requires a blast furnace. You can't have a mini blast furnaces that efficiently produces a tiny amount of steel. The initial investment is substantial, but once in place, the per-unit cost of production falls dramatically as output rises. This is because the fixed cost of the equipment is spread over a larger number of units. Furthermore, specialized machinery often allows for a greater division of labor. Instead of workers performing a variety of tasks, each can focus on a single, highly specific operation. This leads to increased skill and proficiency, further boosting productivity. Consider the assembly line, a hallmark of mass production. Each worker performs a single, repetitive task, becoming highly adept at it, and the overall process becomes dramatically more efficient than if each worker attempted to build an entire product from start to finish. This division of labor, facilitated by specialized machinery, is a key driver of technical economies of scale. However, the pursuit of technical economies of scale is not without its potential pitfalls. Over-specialization can lead to rigidity and a lack of flexibility. If demand shifts or new technologies emerge, a firm heavily invested in specialized equipment may find it difficult to adapt. Think of a factory designed solely to produce typewriters struggling to transition to manufacturing computers. The specialized equipment becomes obsolete, and the firm's investment turns into a liability. Moreover, specialized machinery can create bottlenecks if not properly integrated into the overall production process. A high-speed bottling machine, for instance, is useless if the supply of bottles or the delivery of filled bottles is inadequate. A holistic systems thinking approach is crucial to realizing the full potential of technical economies of scale. The entire process, from raw materials to finished product, must be carefully coordinated and optimized. It is also important to consider the human element. Highly specialized tasks can be monotonous and demotivating for workers, potentially leading to lower productivity and higher turnover. The classical economist might have championed specialization without reservation, but the policymaker must consider the social and psychological impact on the workforce. A balance must be struck between efficiency and employee well-being. In essence, technical economies of scale, driven by specialized machinery and processes, represent a powerful engine for increasing productivity and reducing costs. But harnessing this power requires careful planning, a systems-level perspective, and a sensitivity to the human dimension. As we prepare to transition to the next stage of our exploration, it leaves us to ponder: what are the limitations to exploiting specialization to the fullest? Are there forces inherent to market dynamics that push against ever-increasing specialization, encouraging a return to flexibility and diversification? Title: Chapter 8: Managerial Economies of Scale. Streamlining operations, body. Welcome back, friends. Last we spoke, we considered the burgeoning scale of production itself. Now, let us gently turn our attention inwards to the art of managing that scale. For merely increasing the size of an operation is not, in itself, a guarantee of efficiency. Indeed, expansion without thoughtful orchestration can often lead to, well, let's just say, less than optimal outcomes. We delve now into the subtle dance of managerial economies of scale, how astute leadership can harness the forces of expansion to create genuine, lasting advantage. Recall our earlier discussions on economies of scale. These cost advantages, derived from increased production levels, are often attributed to factors like specialization of labor or bulk purchasing. But beneath these tangible benefits lies a more ethereal element: the effectiveness of management. As an organization grows, so too does the complexity of its internal workings. Communication pathways lengthen, decision-making processes become more convoluted, and the potential for misallocation of resources increases exponentially. Managerial diseconomies of scale, as they're sometimes called, can quickly erode any initial advantages gained from simply being bigger. Consider, for instance, a small bakery. The owner-baker likely oversees every aspect of the operation, from selecting ingredients to decorating cakes. This direct involvement allows for rapid adjustments and efficient resource allocation. Now, imagine that bakery expanding into a chain of a dozen stores. Suddenly, the owner-baker is no longer able to directly supervise every detail. Layers of management are introduced, leading to potential delays, distortions in communication, and a greater risk of inconsistencies in product quality. If the managerial structure is not carefully designed and implemented, the cost savings from bulk purchasing flour may be more than offset by the inefficiencies created by bureaucratic bloat. So, how does a firm navigate these treacherous waters? The answer, as is often the case in economics, lies in finding the right balance. The classical economist, long ago, recognized the importance of efficient resource allocation. Applied to management, this principle suggests that firms should strive to optimize their organizational structure, aligning responsibilities and authority in a way that minimizes communication costs and maximizes responsiveness. This might involve decentralizing decision-making, empowering lower-level managers to make decisions within their spheres of influence. Alternatively, it might involve investing in sophisticated information technology to streamline communication and improve coordination across different departments. The policymaker often considers the impact of regulations on managerial efficiency. Overly burdensome regulations can stifle innovation and create unnecessary bureaucratic layers, thereby exacerbating the problem of managerial diseconomies of scale. Conversely, regulations that promote transparency and accountability can help to improve managerial efficiency by providing better information and incentivizing responsible decision-making. Think of it like a river. A small stream flows smoothly, easily navigated. But as the stream widens into a river, currents become stronger, eddies form, and navigation becomes more challenging. A skilled captain, however, understands these currents and knows how to steer the ship safely through the turbulent waters. Similarly, a skilled manager understands the complexities of a large organization and knows how to navigate the challenges of coordinating resources and motivating employees. The pursuit of managerial economies of scale is not a one-time project, but rather a continuous process of refinement and adaptation. As the external environment changes and as the organization itself evolves, the managerial structure must be constantly reevaluated and adjusted to ensure that it remains aligned with the firm's overall goals. The learning curve, you see, isn't just about production techniques. It applies to management itself. We learn by doing, by observing what works and what doesn't, and by constantly striving to improve our performance. This is a subtle art, a delicate balance, a continuous dance. As we conclude this chapter, consider this. How do these internal managerial efficiencies or inefficiencies ripple outwards, influencing a firm's ability to capitalize on economies of scope, venturing into related product markets? This question lingers, a gentle hum, as we prepare for our next exploration. Mood. soothing, intellectual, analytical. Chapter 9. Financial Economies of Scale. Access to Capital. Good evening. Last time, we explored the nuanced relationship between bulk purchasing and economies of scale. Now, let us consider another crucial facet of scaling: access to capital. Just as a plant needs water to grow, a business requires funding to expand its operations and realize its full productive potential. And like many aspects of economics, this relationship is not always straightforward. It's a delicate dance between risk, reward, and the ever-present force of market dynamics. Financial economies of scale arise when larger firms possess inherent advantages in securing capital compared to their smaller counterparts. This isn't merely a matter of size equaling prestige, although that plays a role. It's about the perception of risk, the structure of financial markets, and the informational asymmetries that inevitably exist. Imagine two bakeries. One, a small family-owned shop with a single oven and a loyal local following. The other, a regional chain with multiple locations, a sophisticated supply chain, and a well-established brand. Both seek to expand, perhaps by opening a new location. The small bakery approaches a local bank for a loan. The bank, lacking extensive financial data and facing the inherent uncertainty of a single owner-operated enterprise, may demand a higher interest rate or require significant collateral. The regional chain, however, presents a different picture. Its larger size allows it to spread risk across multiple locations. Its established track record provides a richer dataset for analysis. Its very brand name implies a degree of stability and predictability. Consequently, the chain may secure a loan at a lower interest rate, or even access alternative funding sources like bond markets, completely unavailable to the smaller bakery. This advantage stems from several interconnected factors. Firstly, information asymmetries are reduced for larger firms. Lenders have more data to assess the risk associated with lending to a larger company. They can analyze financial statements, market share data, and industry trends with greater confidence. This reduces the perceived risk, leading to lower borrowing costs. Secondly, transaction costs are lower for larger loans. The administrative overhead associated with processing a loan is relatively fixed. Therefore, the cost per dollar borrowed decreases as the loan size increases. Larger firms, seeking larger sums, benefit from this efficiency. Thirdly, larger firms often have access to a wider range of funding sources. They can issue bonds, raise equity through stock offerings, or attract venture capital investment. These options are generally unavailable to smaller firms, which are often limited to traditional bank loans or personal savings. Consider the classical economist's theoretical firm. As it scales, these various financial streams become not only accessible, but also cheaper than the initial, small-scale lending. The implications of financial economies of scale are profound. They create a self-reinforcing cycle. Larger firms, with easier access to capital, can invest more readily in growth and innovation, further solidifying their market position and reinforcing their financial advantages. This can lead to increased concentration within industries, potentially stifling competition and innovation from smaller players. But let's not paint too bleak a picture. The rise of crowdfunding platforms and alternative lending models has begun to democratize access to capital, offering new avenues for smaller firms to secure funding. The policymaker also has a role to play in fostering a level playing field. Through regulations that promote transparency and prevent anti-competitive practices. And sometimes, the very agility and local focus of smaller firms can outweigh the financial advantages of their larger counterparts. We must consider, too, the potential for diseconomies of scale in finance. As firms grow excessively large, the complexity of their financial structures can increase, leading to inefficiencies and potential vulnerabilities. The collapse of large financial institutions during the global financial crisis served as a stark reminder that size is not always synonymous with stability. The pursuit of financial economies of scale, like all economic strategies, is a balancing act. It requires careful consideration of risk, reward, and the potential for unintended consequences. It's about understanding how the flow of capital shapes the landscape of industry and the opportunities available to businesses of all sizes. And so we must reflect. What happens when access to finance is not the limiting factor? What other economies, or diseconomies, then become paramount in shaping the growth and direction of firms? Chapter 10. Purchasing economies of scale, bulk buying power. Ah, yes. We've navigated the intricacies of fixed and variable costs, the delicate dance between inputs and outputs. Now, let's shift our focus, gently, towards the broader implications of scale. Specifically, tonight we'll consider how a company's purchasing power can be amplified through bulk buying, creating what we call purchasing economies of scale. This is a fascinating area, demonstrating how strategic procurement can significantly impact a firm's overall cost structure. Imagine a small artisan bakery. They might purchase flour in 5-kilogram bags from a local supplier. The cost per kilogram, let's say, is relatively high. Now picture a massive industrial bakery producing thousands of loaves daily. They wouldn't dream of buying flour in small bags. Instead, they contract with a mill to receive deliveries of flour in multi-ton shipments. They achieve purchasing economies of scale. The essence of these economies lies in the reduction of per-unit costs achieved through larger volume purchases. This reduction arises from several factors. First, bulk discounts. Suppliers are often willing to offer lower prices per unit when dealing with large orders. This is simply a matter of supply and demand, and also a reflection of reduced transaction costs on the supplier's side. One large order is easier to process than numerous small ones. Secondly, reduced transportation costs. Shipping a large quantity of goods in a single shipment is typically more efficient than shipping the same quantity in multiple smaller shipments. This efficiency translates into lower per-unit transportation expenses. Think of it like a river flowing smoothly and efficiently when it's full, compared to a shallow, fragmented stream. Thirdly, lower administrative costs. Processing a single large order requires less administrative overhead than processing many small orders. This includes tasks such as invoicing, payment processing, and order tracking. This is an example of how streamlining operations can bring cost savings to the procurement phase. Furthermore, larger buyers often possess greater negotiating power. They can leverage their purchasing volume to demand better terms from suppliers, including extended payment deadlines, enhanced warranties, or even customized product specifications at a lower price. This negotiating leverage can act as a considerable lever to reduce the purchase price. Let's consider the case of a large automobile manufacturer. Their demand for steel, tires, and electronic components is immense. Because of this, they can negotiate extremely favorable contracts with their suppliers. These contracts might include volume discounts, guaranteed supply, and even joint research and development initiatives to optimize the performance of specific components. The impact on the cost of production per vehicle can be substantial. Now, the benefits of purchasing economies of scale extend beyond mere cost reduction. Consistent quality is a significant advantage. By establishing long-term relationships with reliable suppliers, a company can ensure a steady supply of high-quality inputs, which in turn contributes to the consistent quality of its own product. This helps reduce variability and can lead to fewer quality control issues down the line. However, we must acknowledge the potential downsides. Over-reliance on a single supplier can create vulnerability. If that supplier experiences disruptions, a natural disaster, a labor strike, or financial difficulties, the buyer's operations could be severely impacted. Risk diversification, therefore, is a vital consideration. Also, large inventory holdings, stemming from bulk purchases, can increase storage costs and the risk of obsolescence. Managing inventory efficiently becomes a crucial skill, demanding accurate forecasting and effective warehousing practices. The warehouse costs act as a counterweight to the benefits of the bulk purchase. Thinking critically, the benefits of purchasing economies of scale are not automatic. They require strategic planning, careful supplier selection, and efficient inventory management. Companies must weigh the potential cost savings against the risks associated with large volume purchases and develop mitigation strategies. The policymaker needs to be aware of these risks when considering industry regulations. In conclusion, purchasing economies of scale represent a powerful mechanism for reducing costs and improving efficiency. However, they are not without their challenges. By understanding the underlying principles and potential pitfalls, businesses can effectively leverage their purchasing power to gain a competitive advantage. The key lies in finding the right balance between cost savings and risk management. And now, as we gently drift onward, our thoughts turn to the next stage, the nuanced impact of scope. How does producing a variety of related goods affect overall costs? That is a question for another time, perhaps another night. Chapter 11. Marketing Economies of Scale. Brand power and reach. Welcome, once again, to our exploration of economic principles. We've journeyed through the intricacies of production, meticulously examining economies of scale, scope, and the subtle dance of learning curves. Now, let us shift our focus, gently and deliberately, to the realm of marketing, a critical extension of the production process, and one where economies of scale also play a significant, perhaps even more potent, role. We shall explore how these economies manifest in brand power and the ability to achieve unparalleled market reach. Marketing, at its core, is about communicating value. It's about crafting a narrative, building a relationship, and ultimately, persuading consumers to choose your offering over the myriad others vying for their attention. This is a delicate ecosystem where perceptions, emotions, and rational calculations intermingle. And within this ecosystem, economies of scale can provide a powerful advantage. Consider advertising. A small, nascent company might struggle to afford even a modest local campaign. The cost of designing an advertisement, securing airtime, or printing materials can be substantial. However, as a company grows and its production volume increases, it can leverage economies of scale in its marketing efforts. A single, well-crafted advertisement can now reach a far wider audience, spreading the cost across a larger number of units sold. This is a simple, yet profound, illustration of marketing economies of scale. But the benefits extend far beyond mere cost reduction. As a company achieves greater market share, it gains brand recognition. This brand recognition in turn acts as a signal to consumers, a shorthand for quality, reliability, or perhaps even status. The more visible and trusted a brand becomes, the easier it is to introduce new products or services under that brand's umbrella. The classical economist understood this implicitly. A strong brand is an intangible asset, one that can generate substantial returns over time. This is the power of brand equity, built layer by layer through consistent marketing and positive customer experiences. The concept of reach is also crucial. A large company can afford to establish a vast distribution network, ensuring that its products are readily available to consumers in a wide range of locations. This widespread availability reinforces brand recognition and makes it more convenient for consumers to choose their products. Contrast this with a smaller competitor, which may be limited to a local market or a niche distribution channel. The larger company, by virtue of its scale, enjoys a significant advantage in terms of market reach and consumer accessibility. The policymaker must grapple with the implications of these marketing economies of scale. On the one hand, they can lead to lower prices and greater consumer choice, as companies compete to capture market share. On the other hand, they can also create barriers to entry for smaller companies, potentially leading to market concentration and reduced competition. Finding the right balance, promoting innovation and efficiency while ensuring a level playing field, is a constant challenge. The digital age has amplified the effects of marketing economies of scale. Online advertising platforms allow companies to target specific consumer segments with unprecedented precision, maximizing the return on their marketing investment. Social media provides a powerful channel for building brand awareness and engaging with customers directly. These new technologies have democratized access to marketing tools to some extent, but large companies still benefit from their ability to invest in sophisticated analytics and marketing automation platforms. Furthermore, consider the network effect. In some industries, the value of a product or service increases as more people use it. Social media platforms, for example, become more valuable as more users join the network. This creates a powerful incentive for companies to invest heavily in marketing to attract new users, leading to a virtuous cycle of growth. The company that achieves critical mass first often enjoys a significant advantage over its competitors. However, it is not all smooth sailing. Marketing economies of scale can also create inertia. A large company may become complacent, resting on its laurels and failing to adapt to changing consumer preferences. Smaller, more agile companies can then exploit these weaknesses, disrupting the market with innovative products or marketing strategies. The established brand must remain vigilant, constantly innovating and adapting to stay ahead of the curve. The relationship between marketing and production economies of scale is a symbiotic one. Efficient production allows companies to invest more in marketing, while effective marketing drives demand and enables companies to achieve greater production efficiency. This is a delicate balancing act, a continuous feedback loop that shapes the competitive landscape. Chapter 12. Economies of scale. When bigger isn't better, having explored the alluring landscape of economies of scale, where increased production brings lower average costs, we now turn our gaze to the far side of that mountain. A place less celebrated, perhaps, but equally vital to understand. This is the territory of economies of scale, where the benefits of expansion begin to unravel, and bigger truly ceases to be better. Imagine a river, flowing smoothly towards the sea. As it widens, it can carry more water more efficiently. This is the essence of economies of scale. But what happens if the river becomes too wide? The current slows, eddies form, debris accumulates. The once efficient flow becomes sluggish, even choked. This, in essence, is what happens within an organization experiencing economies of scale. The core principle is simple. Beyond a certain point, increasing the scale of production leads to higher average costs. It's a counterintuitive notion at first, especially after witnessing the gains achieved through economies of scale. So, what forces are at play here? One primary culprit is managerial complexity. As an organization grows, the layers of management inevitably increase. Communication lines lengthen, becoming distorted along the way. Decisions take longer to reach those who need them. The nimble startup, once capable of rapid adaptation, transforms into a bureaucratic behemoth, weighed down by its own size. Imagine a vast network of pipes, each connection a potential source of leaks and inefficiencies. This increased administrative burden translates directly into higher costs. Another significant factor is loss of control and coordination. Think of a symphony orchestra. A small ensemble, well-rehearsed and intimately connected, can produce beautiful music with remarkable precision. Now, imagine expanding that orchestra tenfold. Without meticulous coordination and unwavering discipline, the result would be cacophony, not harmony. Similarly, in a large corporation, coordinating the activities of numerous departments and individuals becomes increasingly difficult. Duplication of effort, conflicting priorities, and a general lack of alignment can erode efficiency and drive up costs. Further complicating matters is the potential for increased alienation of the workforce. In smaller organizations, employees often feel a stronger connection to the company's mission and a greater sense of belonging. As the organization grows, this sense of connection can diminish. Employees may feel like mere cogs in a machine, leading to decreased motivation, lower productivity, and higher rates of absenteeism. Consider the craftsman, intimately involved in every stage of the production process, versus the worker on an assembly line, performing the same repetitive task day in and day out. The former is likely to be more engaged and productive. Furthermore, fixed resources can become stretched thin. While economies of scale often involve leveraging fixed costs across a larger output, there's a limit. A company might initially benefit from using a single large factory, but as demand continues to grow, that factory may become overcrowded, leading to bottlenecks and inefficiencies. Expanding beyond the capacity of key resources can nullify the benefits of increased scale. The classical economist observing these phenomena would caution against blindly pursuing growth. The policymaker, grappling with the implications of large corporations, must consider the potential for economies of scale when designing regulations and promoting competition. Finding the optimal size, the sweet spot where economies of scale are maximized and diseconomies are minimized, is a delicate balancing act. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. It depends on the specific industry, technology, and management capabilities of the organization. Understanding economies of scale is not about discouraging growth altogether. Rather, it's about approaching expansion with caution, awareness, and a willingness to adapt. It's about recognizing that size alone is not a guarantee of success, and that sustainable growth requires careful management and a continuous commitment to efficiency. The path to continued prosperity lies not just in expansion, but in the intelligent management of size. As we close this chapter, we are left to ponder the next stage in this economic journey. As firms grow, so too do economies. So, how do we balance the benefits of increased market power with the potential for stifling innovation? We shall explore this in the next chapter. Chapter 13. Communication Breakdown. A dice economy of scale, we've journeyed through the pleasant landscapes of economies of scale, scope, and learning, observing how firms can reduce their average costs by growing, diversifying, and mastering their crafts. Now, as the sun begins its descent, let us turn our gaze to a less idyllic vista: the complexities that arise when growth surpasses a certain point, a phenomenon known as dice economies of scale. This isn't merely a reversal of fortune. It's a crucial understanding of the delicate balance that must be maintained within any economic system. Consider it as a river. A small stream, fed by a single spring, flows smoothly. As it gathers tributaries, it widens and deepens, capable of carrying more water, powering larger mills. But what happens when the river becomes too vast? The current weakens, eddies form, and navigation becomes treacherous. Similarly, firms can reach a size where the advantages of scale begin to erode, replaced by inefficiencies that drive costs upward. The heart of these dice economies often lies in communication. In a small firm, communication is usually direct and informal. The entrepreneur can easily convey their vision, and feedback loops are short and effective. However, as the organization expands, so does its hierarchical structure. Layers of management are added, and information must travel through multiple channels, like messages passed down a long line. Imagine a crucial piece of information originating from the shop floor. By the time it reaches senior management, several interpretations and minor alterations may have crept in. The original intent might be diluted, distorted, or even completely lost. This communication breakdown is not simply a matter of inefficiency. It can lead to costly errors, misaligned strategies, and a general sense of disconnect between different parts of the organization. Furthermore, larger organizations often become increasingly bureaucratic. Rules and procedures, initially designed to streamline operations, can become rigid and stifling. Employees spend more time navigating internal processes than focusing on their core tasks. Decision-making slows down, responsiveness to market changes diminishes, and innovation is often discouraged. This bureaucratic inertia is a common symptom of dice economies of scale, a heavy weight that drags down productivity. The classical economist, observing these trends, might point to the inherent limitations of managerial oversight. As the firm grows, it becomes increasingly difficult for managers to effectively monitor and control all aspects of the business. The sheer volume of information overwhelms their capacity, leading to errors and inefficiencies. In essence, the span of control, the number of subordinates a manager can effectively supervise, has its limits. The policymaker, faced with the societal implications, might consider antitrust regulations to prevent firms from becoming too dominant and stifling competition. They understand that unchecked growth can lead to monopolies or oligopolies, which can exploit consumers and suppress innovation. Maintaining a healthy balance between scale and competition is a crucial role for government intervention. Another factor contributing to dice economies of scale is employee morale. In a smaller firm, employees often feel a stronger sense of connection to the organization's mission. They are more likely to be personally invested in its success and feel valued for their contributions. However, as the firm grows, employees may become anonymous cogs in a large machine. Their sense of purpose diminishes, and motivation wanes. Absenteeism rises, productivity falls, and the overall work environment suffers. Consider the human element in this equation. Humans crave connection and purpose. When these are diminished by excessive size and impersonal processes, the entire system suffers. The initial cost advantages of scale are offset by the rising costs of managing a disengaged and demoralized workforce. The challenge, then, is not to avoid growth altogether, but to manage it intelligently. Firms must strive to maintain clear communication channels, foster a sense of community, and empower employees to take ownership of their work. They must also be vigilant in monitoring their own internal processes, identifying and addressing inefficiencies before they escalate. The firm must be agile and adaptable, like water flowing around obstacles, constantly reshaping itself to maintain equilibrium. As we contemplate the delicate balance between scale and efficiency, between growth and control, a question lingers in the air. How can firms harness the power of technology to overcome the limitations of scale and maintain their agility in an ever-changing world? What new economic models are emerging to redefine the boundaries of the firm? These are questions we will explore as we continue our journey through the landscape of economics. Chapter 14: Bureaucracy and Coordination Problems. The limits of growth. We've traced the intoxicating ascent of economies of scale, scope, and the learning curve, a symphony of efficiency playing out across factory floors and global markets. Like a well-oiled machine, increasing production promises lower per-unit costs, a broader product range caters to diverse desires, and accumulated experience unlocks further optimization. But even the most elegant systems harbor shadows. Tonight, we consider the limitations, the friction that arises when growth strains the very structures designed to support it. Let's explore how the promise of limitless expansion encounters the stubborn realities of bureaucracy and coordination. The alluring mathematics of economies of scale suggest that bigger is always better. Yet, as firms swell in size, a subtle entropy begins to creep in. The once nimble decision-making processes become bogged down in layers of management, a labyrinth of approvals and sign-offs. Information, the lifeblood of any organization, now faces a tortuous journey, its signal weakened by the noise of endless internal communication. The benefits of increased scale become choked by the rising tide of administrative overhead. Consider the plight of the policymaker, tasked with implementing a large-scale infrastructure project. On paper, the plan promises dramatic improvements in efficiency and connectivity. But in practice, the project becomes a battleground of competing interests, bureaucratic delays, and unforeseen complications. The initial cost estimates balloon, timelines stretch indefinitely, and the promised benefits remain elusive. The dream of seamless coordination dissolves into a frustrating reality of fragmented responsibilities and conflicting priorities. This is the paradox of scale. What starts as a quest for efficiency can end as a descent into inefficiency. The pursuit of economies of scope, leveraging existing resources to produce a wider array of goods and services, faces its own set of challenges. The inherent logic is undeniable. Why not use existing distribution networks to sell related products? Why not leverage brand reputation to enter adjacent markets? Yet, diversification can dilute focus, stretching resources thin across too many ventures. Expertise, once concentrated in a core competency, becomes fragmented across disparate activities. The classical economist observed that the pin factory, a paragon of specialization, achieved its efficiency through focused labor. Diversification, while potentially profitable, demands a delicate balancing act, a careful weighing of synergies against the risk of dissipating core strengths. And then there's the learning curve, the gradual, often exponential, improvement in efficiency that comes with repeated practice. But what happens when the pace of learning plateaus? When the low-hanging fruit has been harvested, and further gains require increasingly sophisticated and expensive investments. The initial excitement of rapid progress gives way to the slower, more painstaking process of incremental improvement. The organization must cultivate a culture of continuous innovation, fostering creativity and experimentation to unlock new avenues for progress. This requires a willingness to challenge established practices, a tolerance for failure, and a commitment to long-term learning, a departure from the immediate gratification promised by early gains. These limitations, the friction within seemingly frictionless systems, are not mere impediments to growth. They are inherent aspects of complexity, a reminder that even the most powerful economic forces are subject to the laws of diminishing returns. Overcoming these challenges requires a constant reevaluation of organizational structures, a willingness to decentralize decision-making, and a commitment to fostering open communication. It requires a shift from a purely quantitative focus on scale to a more qualitative appreciation of agility, adaptability, and innovation. We must learn to navigate the complexities of large organizations, just as sailors navigate the complexities of the sea. A constant adjustment of the sails ensures progress towards the horizon. But if economies of scale, scope, and learning curves are ultimately constrained by internal factors, what lies beyond? What awaits us in the next stage of economic evolution, beyond the pursuit of ever larger scales of production? What new paradigms of value creation will emerge when the limits of traditional growth become undeniable? These are the questions that beckon us towards the next chapter. Good night. Chapter 15. Economies of Scope. Sharing resources across product lines. Tonight, we turn from the deepening well of scale economies, that concentrated focus on increasing output of a single product, to a broader landscape. If economies of scale were about doing more of one thing, economies of scope are about doing different things, beautifully harmonized. Think of it as moving from the solo violinist to the full orchestra, each instrument adding richness and texture, amplifying the overall composition. Economies of scope arise when producing multiple distinct products or services together becomes less costly than producing them separately. It's a principle founded on the elegant notion of shared resources. The essence of it lies in exploiting complementarities, synergies, and the avoidance of duplication. Imagine, if you will, a well-tended garden where the same water source nourishes roses and herbs, each benefiting from the shared infrastructure. Consider, for example, a pharmaceutical company. It invests heavily in research and development, a costly but essential endeavor. The knowledge gleaned from developing one drug, understanding biological pathways, perfecting delivery mechanisms, can often be applied to the development of other drugs. The same scientific expertise, the same laboratory equipment, the same regulatory compliance infrastructure, all are leveraged across multiple product lines, reducing the per-product cost significantly. This sharing of expensive, specialized resources is the bedrock of scope economies. The benefits extend beyond purely tangible resources. Brand reputation, for instance, can be a powerful driver of scope economies. A company known for its unwavering commitment to quality in one product line benefits from a halo effect when introducing new, related products. Consumers are more likely to trust and adopt these new offerings, reducing marketing costs and accelerating market penetration. Think of it as a ripple effect, spreading outward from a single point of excellence. Distribution networks, too, often exhibit economies of scope. A food manufacturer that already distributes frozen meals can often add frozen desserts to its existing delivery routes with minimal incremental costs. The trucks are already running, the freezers are already cold, the relationships with retailers are already established. The only addition is the product itself, spreading the fixed costs of distribution across a larger volume of goods. However, realizing these economies of scope is not without its challenges. Effective management is crucial. Coordination across different product lines becomes more complex, requiring robust communication channels and well-defined organizational structures. The potential for conflicts and inefficiencies increases as resources are shared and priorities are juggled. Furthermore, the benefits of scope economies can be eroded by diseconomies of scope. This occurs when the complexity of managing multiple, diverse businesses outweighs the benefits of resource sharing. Imagine a company that tries to diversify into too many unrelated areas, stretching its managerial capacity too thin. The resulting confusion, bureaucracy, and lack of focus can actually increase costs and reduce overall efficiency. It's akin to trying to play too many instruments in our orchestral analogy, leading to cacophony rather than harmony. The classical economist observed these dynamics, emphasizing the importance of carefully evaluating the trade-offs between specialization and diversification. The policymaker, in turn, considers the broader implications, recognizing that encouraging appropriate diversification can foster innovation and economic growth, but also that poorly managed diversification can lead to instability and failure. Therefore, a successful strategy based on economies of scope requires a delicate balance. A clear understanding of the synergies between different product lines, efficient resource allocation mechanisms, and a strong, adaptable organizational structure are essential ingredients. It's about creating a portfolio of businesses that complement each other, amplifying their individual strengths and mitigating their weaknesses. As we conclude tonight, consider this. If economies of scale focused on the efficiency of doing and economies of scope on the harmony of sharing, what fundamental principles will shape our understanding of cost advantages in the coming age of dynamic and interconnected systems? What new efficiencies await discovery as we move beyond the traditional product line? These questions, my friends, will guide us in our next exploration. Chapter 16: Core Competencies and Economies of Scope. Good evening. Tonight, we'll delve into the fascinating interplay between a firm's capabilities and its cost structure. We'll explore how strategically leveraging internal strengths and expanding operational breadth can unlock significant economic advantages. Our focus will be on economies of scale, economies of scope, and the power of learning curves. Think of these concepts as interconnected currents, subtly shaping the landscape of production and profitability. Let's begin with economies of scale. At its heart, this principle suggests that as a firm increases its output, its average cost per unit tends to decrease. This isn't merely about buying more raw materials at a discount, although that can certainly play a part. It's more fundamentally about efficiency. A larger operation allows for greater specialization of labor. Tasks can be broken down into smaller, more manageable components, leading to increased proficiency and reduced wasted effort. Imagine a small artisan workshop versus a large factory. The factory can afford dedicated machine operators, quality control specialists, and logistics managers, leading to a more streamlined and cost-effective production process. Furthermore, larger-scale operations often justify investments in more sophisticated, technologically advanced equipment. While the initial capital outlay might be substantial, the resulting increase in productivity and reduction in per-unit costs can be significant. Think of the transition from manual typewriters to computer-assisted typesetting in the publishing industry. The initial investment was considerable, but the long-term gains in efficiency were undeniable. However, it's crucial to remember that economies of scale are not limitless. There's a point, sometimes referred to as the minimum efficient scale, beyond which further increases in output do not lead to significant cost reductions, and may even lead to diseconomies of scale. These diseconomies can arise from increased managerial complexity, communication breakdowns, and bureaucratic inefficiencies. The sheer size of an organization can become a hindrance, slowing down decision-making and stifling innovation. Now, let's shift our focus to economies of scope. This concept centers on the cost advantages gained by producing a wider variety of goods or services within a single firm. The idea is that sharing resources and capabilities across different product lines can be more cost-effective than producing each product line independently. Consider a textbook example. A printing company that already possesses the infrastructure and expertise to print books can readily expand into printing magazines or brochures. The fixed costs associated with printing are spread across a larger volume of output, thereby reducing the average cost per unit across all product lines. Economies of scope also arise from the synergy between different business units. Marketing and distribution networks can be shared, brand reputation can be leveraged across multiple products, and research and development efforts can be applied to a broader range of applications. This synergistic effect can create a competitive advantage that is difficult for specialized firms to replicate. The classical economist understood this intuitively, recognizing that resource sharing optimized production. Finally, let's consider learning curves. These curves describe the relationship between cumulative production and cost per unit. The fundamental principle is simple. As a firm gains experience in producing a particular good or service, its efficiency improves and its costs decrease. This improvement stems from a variety of factors, including improved work processes, better coordination, and increased employee skill. The policymaker often uses this principle to justify government subsidies for emerging industries. The learning curve effect is particularly pronounced in industries characterized by complex production processes or rapid technological change. Think of the early days of automobile manufacturing or the development of semiconductor technology. As firms accumulated experience, they were able to streamline their operations, reduce waste, and improve product quality, leading to significant cost reductions. It's important to note that learning curves are not automatic. They require conscious effort and a commitment to continuous improvement. Firms must actively seek out opportunities to learn from their experiences, experiment with new approaches, and invest in training and development. Moreover, the benefits of learning curves can be eroded by complacency or a failure to adapt to changing market conditions. So as we conclude this evening, consider this. How do firms strategically balance economies of scale, scope, and learning to build enduring competitive advantages? And more importantly, how does the dynamic interplay of these factors shape the evolving landscape of the industries they inhabit? What unseen synergies wait to be discovered in the next phase of economic evolution? That will be a worthy topic for our consideration next time. Chapter 17. Diversification Strategies and Economies of Scope. Welcome back. Last time, we charted the fascinating, often turbulent waters of mergers and acquisitions. Now, let's shift our gaze slightly, examining how firms grow not just by absorbing others, but by cleverly expanding their own internal capabilities. Tonight, our focus rests on diversification strategies, driven by the compelling forces of economies of scale, scope, and the subtle power of learning curves. Think of it as orchestrating a broader symphony, rather than simply amplifying a single instrument. The classical economist, many years ago, observed that as a firm increases its production volume, its average costs often decrease. This, in essence, is an economy of scale. It's a deceptively simple idea, yet its implications ripple throughout industries. Consider a large automobile manufacturer. The initial investment in machinery, the assembly line, the robotic arms, these are substantial fixed costs. Whether they produce 1 car or 1 million, these costs remain relatively constant. Thus, as production increases, these fixed costs are spread across a larger number of units, dramatically reducing the cost per vehicle. This same principle applies across many industries. Bulk purchasing discounts, spreading administrative overhead, and efficient utilization of specialized equipment all contribute to the allure of scale. However, scale isn't the only game in town. Economies of scope offer a different, perhaps more nuanced, advantage. Scope arises when a firm can produce 2 or more different products or services more cheaply together than it could by producing them separately. Think of a forestry company that owns vast tracts of land and dye. They can harvest timber, of course, but they can also lease land for recreational use, extract minerals, or even establish carbon sequestration projects. These diverse activities share a common resource, the land itself, and by managing them collectively, the firm can achieve cost efficiencies that would be impossible for separate, specialized entities. The essence of scope lies in synergistic resource utilization. It's like a chef who uses the same set of knives and pots to prepare many different dishes. The tools are versatile and the chef's expertise is transferable. This is what distinguishes scope from scale. Scale is about more of the same. Scope is about different, but related things. Then, there's the subtle, often overlooked, power of learning curves. This concept suggests that as a firm accumulates experience in producing a good or service, its efficiency improves and its costs decline. This isn't simply about producing more. It's about becoming better at producing. Each repetition, each iteration, yields valuable insights, leading to process improvements, streamlined workflows, and reduced waste. Think of a software development team working on a complex project. The first few iterations might be slow and error-prone. But as they learn from their mistakes, as they refine their code and their communication, their productivity accelerates exponentially. The learning curve isn't just a theory. It's a tangible force that shapes competitive landscapes. The policymaker, when crafting regulations, must consider the interplay between these three forces. Overly restrictive regulations can stifle innovation and prevent firms from achieving the scale and scope necessary to compete effectively. Conversely, lax regulations can allow firms to exploit their market power, potentially harming consumers and stifling competition. It's a delicate balancing act, requiring a deep understanding of the economic forces at play. Antitrust authorities, for instance, often scrutinize mergers and acquisitions precisely because they can lead to increased scale and scope, potentially creating monopolies. Diversification strategies, at their core, are attempts to exploit economies of scope and learning. A company might diversify into related industries, leveraging its existing expertise and resources to create new revenue streams. Or, it might diversify into unrelated industries, seeking to reduce its overall risk exposure. However, diversification is not without its challenges. Managing a complex portfolio of businesses can be difficult, and the potential for synergies may not always materialize. Ultimately, the success of any diversification strategy hinges on a firm's ability to effectively manage its resources, foster innovation, and adapt to changing market conditions. These economic principles of scale, scope, and learning aren't just abstract concepts. They are the engines that drive corporate strategy and shape the evolution of industries. As we conclude this chapter, a question lingers. How do these economies of scale and scope interact with the emerging digital landscape, where network effects and platform business models redefine the boundaries of competition? That, perhaps, is the story for our next encounter. Until then, sleep soundly. Chapter 18. Challenges in Achieving Economies of Scope. Coordination costs. The promise of economies of scope, like a carefully crafted symphony, hinges on the harmonious interplay of different parts. A firm envisions synergy, the artful blending of resources and capabilities across its product lines. Yet, the path to realizing these anticipated cost savings is often strewn with obstacles, the most significant being coordination costs. These costs represent the expenditure incurred in managing and synchronizing the various activities required to produce multiple products under one organizational umbrella. They are the friction within the system, the energy required to overcome inertia. Imagine a large conglomerate extending its reach into seemingly related but ultimately distinct markets. A food company acquiring a clothing manufacturer, for example. On paper, this may seem like a strategic move to diversify risk, but in practice, the operational realities are vastly different. The food company's management, accustomed to the rapid turnover and perishable nature of their goods, may struggle to understand the slower production cycles and fashion-driven demands of the apparel industry. This fundamental disconnect leads to miscommunication, inefficiencies, and ultimately, increased costs. Coordination costs manifest in several insidious forms. Communication costs surge as information must flow between different departments, divisions, and even geographical locations. The simple act of holding meetings, writing reports, and establishing standardized procedures consumes valuable time and resources. The larger and more diverse the organization, the greater the burden of maintaining clear and consistent communication. Then, there are the decision-making costs. When numerous products are managed under a single umbrella, decisions become more complex and often require input from multiple stakeholders. Reaching a consensus can be a slow and arduous process, leading to delays in product development, marketing campaigns, and other critical initiatives. This bureaucratic inertia can stifle innovation and render the firm less responsive to changing market conditions. The policymaker, ever mindful of societal efficiency, often observes these sprawling entities with a wary eye. Monitoring costs are another significant hurdle. Ensuring that each division is operating efficiently and in alignment with the overall corporate strategy requires a robust monitoring system. This involves gathering data, tracking performance metrics, and implementing control mechanisms. However, monitoring becomes increasingly challenging as the firm diversifies its product portfolio. Managers may lack the specialized knowledge to effectively evaluate the performance of divisions operating in unfamiliar industries. The classical economist would have undoubtedly considered these hidden overheads with concern. Incentive alignment also poses a formidable challenge. When different divisions have conflicting goals or priorities, it can be difficult to incentivize them to cooperate effectively. For example, one division may be focused on maximizing its own short-term profits, even if it comes at the expense of another division or the company as a whole. Creating a system of rewards and penalties that aligns the interests of all stakeholders is a delicate balancing act. Furthermore, organizational culture clashes can undermine the potential benefits of economies of scope. When companies with different cultures and values are merged or integrated, it can lead to conflict and resistance. Employees may be unwilling to adopt new ways of working or collaborate with colleagues from different backgrounds. These cultural tensions can disrupt operations and erode morale. The pursuit of economies of scope, therefore, is not a guaranteed path to enhanced profitability. It requires careful planning, meticulous execution, and a keen awareness of the potential pitfalls. Firms must invest in robust communication systems, streamlined decision-making processes, effective monitoring mechanisms, and incentive structures that promote cooperation. Ignoring these coordination costs is akin to building a magnificent bridge without accounting for the stresses and strains on its foundations. Successfully navigating these challenges requires more than just operational efficiency. It demands a deep understanding of organizational behavior, strategic alignment, and the delicate art of managing complexity. The question then becomes, how do organizations evolve their structures and strategies to minimize these inherent coordination costs, while still capitalizing on the potential synergies across diverse product lines? We will delve into this intricate dance in our next exploration, where we consider the organizational structures best suited to balance diversity and control. Chapter title: Chapter 19. The Learning Curve. Concept and Early Observations. Script Body. Good evening. We've spent some time considering the landscape of production and costs, observing how they interact like the delicate gears of a clock. Tonight, we turn our attention to a phenomenon that subtly yet powerfully reshapes those relationships over time: the learning curve. Imagine a novice artisan crafting their first piece. Hesitantly, cautiously they proceed, each movement deliberate, each decision weighed with uncertainty. Now, picture that same artisan after years of practice. Their hands move with fluid grace, imperfections vanish almost instinctively, and the final product reflects a mastery born of repetition and refinement. This, in essence, captures the spirit of the learning curve. Economies of scale and scope, as we've discussed, are largely static advantages, arising from the size or breadth of operations at a given point in time. The learning curve, however, introduces a dynamic element. It suggests that as we accumulate experience, we become more efficient. We learn to do things better, faster, and with fewer resources. This increased efficiency translates directly into lower costs per unit of output. The concept, in its nascent form, emerged from observations within the aviation industry during World War II. Early studies meticulously tracked the labor hours required to manufacture aircraft. The pattern was striking. With each doubling of cumulative production, the labor hours needed for the next unit decreased by a consistent percentage. This percentage, known as the learning rate, quantified the rate at which efficiency improved. A typical learning rate might be 80%. This means that after doubling cumulative production, the cost of producing the next unit falls to 80% of its previous level. So, if the first unit cost 100 hours of labor, the second unit might cost slightly less, but after, say, producing 10 units, when cumulative production doubles to 20 units, the 20th unit will only require 80 hours. This isn't mere rote memorization. It's about deeper understanding and process optimization. Workers become more familiar with the tools and techniques, discover shortcuts, and learn to anticipate potential problems. Management, too, learns to organize production more effectively, streamline workflows, and improve coordination. Consider a newly established factory. Initially, waste is high, errors are frequent, and output is relatively low. As the workforce gains experience, these inefficiencies gradually diminish. Materials are used more effectively, downtime is reduced, and the quality of the final product improves. This continuous improvement cycle drives down costs and enhances competitiveness. Now, the classical economist, ever mindful of the practical implications, saw the potential for strategic advantage. A firm that could quickly move down the learning curve could gain a significant cost advantage over its rivals. This, in turn, could allow it to lower prices, increase market share, and ultimately dominate the industry. The policymaker, too, recognized the importance of the learning curve for economic development. Investing in education, training, and research and development could accelerate the learning process and foster innovation. This, in turn, could lead to higher productivity, greater competitiveness, and improved living standards. However, early observations also revealed certain limitations. The learning curve isn't a universal panacea. Its effects tend to be most pronounced in industries with complex production processes, significant labor content, and opportunities for innovation. Moreover, the learning rate can vary significantly depending on the industry, the technology, and the managerial capabilities of the firm. Furthermore, the learning curve is not infinite. At some point, diminishing returns set in. As the process becomes highly refined, further improvements become increasingly difficult and costly to achieve. The learning rate slows down, and the firm must seek other sources of competitive advantage. Thus, while economies of scale and scope provide a foundational advantage, the learning curve offers a path to sustained improvement, a continuous striving for efficiency that echoes through the entire production system. It's a testament to the power of experience and the potential for organizations to evolve and adapt over time. But how do we sustain that learning and avoid stagnation? That is a question for our next exploration. Mood, relaxing and intellectual. Chapter 20, Quantifying the Learning Curve. Mathematical Models. Good evening. Tonight, we delve into the realm where intuition meets precision. The mathematical models that seek to capture the elusive essence of the learning curve. We've seen how accumulated experience leads to increased efficiency and reduced costs, but how can we translate this qualitative understanding into a quantitative framework? How can we build models that allow the policymaker to predict future cost reductions or the strategist to optimize production schedules? The learning curve, at its heart, describes an inverse relationship. As cumulative production increases, the cost per unit decreases. Several mathematical formulations have been proposed, each offering a slightly different perspective on this fundamental relationship. Perhaps the most common is the power function, often referred to as the Crawford model, or simply the constant percentage learning curve model. Imagine a graph. On the horizontal axis, we have cumulative production. On the vertical, the cost per unit. The Crawford model posits that each time cumulative production doubles, the cost per unit decreases by a constant percentage. This percentage is known as the learning rate. Mathematically, we can express this as CT N, where C is the cost of the nth unit produced. C is the cost of the first unit produced. N is the cumulative number of units produced. B is the learning curve exponent, related to the learning rate. The exponent B is directly related to the learning rate. The relationship is expressed as BUU, log 2. So, if the learning rate is 80%, meaning costs fall by 20% each time production doubles, then B would be approximately 0.322. A higher B implies a steeper learning curve, suggesting that experience translates into greater cost reductions. Consider this. The classical economist might appreciate the elegance of this model. It's relatively simple, easy to implement, and provides a reasonable approximation of reality in many industries. However, like all models, it simplifies a complex process. It assumes a constant learning rate, which may not always hold true. Initial learning might be rapid, followed by diminishing returns as the organization approaches its inherent limitations. Another, slightly more nuanced, model acknowledges this diminishing returns phenomenon. These models, often logarithmic, try to account for the fact that learning isn't necessarily a linear process. Early improvements may be dramatic, but as a company refines its processes and approaches optimal efficiency, further cost reductions become increasingly difficult to achieve. The S-curve model, for example, suggests a period of slow initial learning, followed by a period of rapid improvement, and then, ultimately, a leveling off as diminishing returns set in. It's crucial to remember that these mathematical representations are tools, aids to understanding, not perfect reflections of reality. The real world is messy. Factors like technological advancements, changes in input prices, and shifts in the competitive landscape can all influence the learning curve, making accurate prediction a challenging endeavor. Furthermore, these models typically focus on direct labor costs. In many industries, however, direct labor is only a small portion of total costs. Material costs, overhead, and capital investments can also play significant roles. A comprehensive understanding of cost structures is, therefore, essential for accurate learning curve modeling. The statistician may note the importance of careful data collection and statistical analysis when estimating the parameters of a learning curve model. Accurate data on production costs and cumulative output are crucial for obtaining reliable estimates of the learning rate and exponent. Furthermore, it's essential to consider the potential for measurement errors and biases in the data. The practical application of learning curve models is diverse. They can be used to forecast future production costs, set prices strategically, evaluate the effectiveness of training programs, negotiate contracts with suppliers, and make investment decisions. The implications for strategic decision-making are profound. In essence, the successful application of learning curve models requires a blend of analytical rigor and practical judgment. The mathematical models provide a framework for understanding the relationship between experience and cost. But ultimately, it's the thoughtful interpretation of the results, combined with a deep understanding of the specific industry and company context, that determines their true value. And so, we arrive at the edge of this chapter. But before we conclude, let us ponder a lingering thought. How does the interplay of technological innovation and organizational learning reshape the cost landscape and the competitive dynamics of the future? The impact of training on the learning curve. Having considered the broader landscape of scale and scope, our journey now brings us to a more intimate corner of production, the learning curve. The whisper of efficiency, the slow, steady drumbeat of improvement. These are the hallmarks of this fascinating phenomenon. We've established how increased production volume allows for certain fixed costs to be spread, and how producing related goods can share efficiencies. But what happens when production improves not because of what we produce, but because of how we produce it? The learning curve, sometimes called the experience curve, describes the decline in average production costs as cumulative output increases. It's a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity. It suggests that with each doubling of cumulative output, labor hours required to produce a unit decrease by a constant percentage. This isn't magic, of course. It's the result of a multitude of small, incremental improvements discovered through practice, repetition, and, most importantly, learning. Consider a novice potter. The first few attempts might yield misshapen, uneven vessels, requiring significant effort and time. But with each successive pot, the potter's hands grow more confident, the movements more fluid. Waste decreases, speed increases, and the final product exhibits a marked improvement. This simple analogy captures the essence of the learning curve. The more we do something, the better, and often, the faster we become. However, the natural accrual of experience isn't the sole driver of this phenomenon. The rate at which the learning curve descends can be significantly influenced by deliberate interventions, most notably, training. This is where the economic model intersects with elements of human capital theory. Simply put, investing in the skills and knowledge of your workforce can profoundly accelerate the learning process and amplify its effects. Effective training programs provide a structured framework for knowledge transfer. They codify best practices, identify areas for improvement, and provide workers with the tools and techniques needed to optimize their performance. Instead of relying solely on trial and error, employees can learn from the accumulated wisdom of experts and avoid repeating costly mistakes. Imagine our potter now attending a master class. The guidance received could elevate their skill in weeks, what would take years of solo practice. From an economic perspective, the upfront cost of training is an investment in future productivity. The policymaker understands this, recognizing that subsidies or tax incentives for training can stimulate overall economic growth by lowering production costs and increasing competitiveness. The classical economist, ever wary of intervention, might argue that market forces will naturally drive firms to invest in training where it is profitable. Ultimately, the degree of government involvement remains a subject of ongoing debate. But the benefits of training extend beyond just reducing labor costs. A well-trained workforce is also more adaptable and resilient. They are better equipped to handle unexpected challenges, troubleshoot problems, and innovate new solutions. This is particularly crucial in dynamic industries where technological change is rapid and constant. Continuous learning and development become essential for maintaining a competitive edge. Furthermore, training can foster a culture of continuous improvement within an organization. By empowering employees to identify inefficiencies and implement solutions, companies can unlock a valuable source of innovation. The learning curve, therefore, becomes not just a downward slope, but a catalyst for ongoing growth and development. Consider the engineering firm that invests in its employees' understanding of new software. They don't just speed up their immediate tasks, they foster innovative uses and identify potential problems. The relationship between training and the learning curve is a symbiotic one. Training accelerates the learning process, while the learning curve provides a framework for measuring the effectiveness of training investments. By tracking the rate at which costs decline, organizations can assess the return on their training programs and identify areas where further investment may be needed. This feedback loop is vital for optimizing human capital development and driving long-term economic growth. As we reflect on the impact of training, we're left to ponder another crucial aspect of production. While scale, scope, and learning all contribute to efficiency, there is also the fundamental question of where these activities take place. The geographical distribution of production, the rise of global supply chains. These are the topics that will draw our attention next. What forces determine where businesses choose to locate, and how do these choices shape the global economic landscape? Chapter 22. Technology Adoption and the Learning Curve. Good evening. We spoke last time of the inherent expansion within markets, and how scale dictates a certain destiny for the players within. Now, let's turn our attention to the engine that drives that expansion, the slow, deliberate adoption of technology and its impact on what we call the learning curve. Imagine it as a stream, gently carving its path through the bedrock of cost and production. Each innovation, each refinement, reshapes the channel, allowing for a smoother, more efficient flow. At the heart of it all lies the fundamental truth that producing goods and services isn't a static affair. Costs aren't fixed in stone. As output increases, efficiencies emerge, economies of scale begin to whisper their promises, and these are amplified through the astute adoption of the technologies that will support that. Consider a young firm, brimming with potential. Initially, their costs per unit are relatively high. They are learning, experimenting, making mistakes. Each widget, each service offering, requires significant effort and resources. But as they produce more, as they refine their processes and invest in better equipment, as they implement specialized training and foster efficient teams, something remarkable happens. Their costs begin to decline. This decline isn't simply a matter of luck. It's the result of a systematic accumulation of knowledge and experience, codified within the production process. This, in essence, is the learning curve. It's a graphical representation of the relationship between cumulative production and average cost. The more you produce, the more you learn, and the lower your costs become. It's a phenomenon that has profound implications for everything from pricing strategies to competitive advantage. The classical economist understood this intuitively long before the formalization of learning curve theory. They recognized that specialization and the division of labor, enabled by technological advancements, led to increased productivity. The assembly line, a quintessential example of technological adoption, dramatically reduced the time and resources required to manufacture complex products. However, the learning curve isn't simply about increased efficiency in production. It also encompasses the entire value chain, from raw materials sourcing to distribution. Think of it as a web. As one strand strengthens, the entire structure becomes more resilient. As companies adopt new technologies in logistics, for example, they can reduce transportation costs, minimize inventory holding, and improve delivery times. These efficiencies ripple through the entire organization, contributing to a lower overall cost structure. Now, let's consider a subtle distinction: the difference between economies of scale and the learning curve. They are related, but not identical. Economies of scale refer to the cost advantages that arise from increasing the scale of production at a given point in time. It's a snapshot. The learning curve, on the other hand, focuses on the dynamic reduction in costs over time as cumulative production increases. It's a journey. And what of economies of scope? These arise when producing multiple products or services together is cheaper than producing them separately. Technology often facilitates economies of scope. A single sophisticated piece of equipment, for instance, may be capable of producing a wide variety of products, reducing the need for multiple specialized machines. Imagine a versatile printing press that can switch between producing brochures, magazines, and packaging materials with minimal setup time. That is economies of scope in action, powered by technology. The policymaker must grapple with the implications of technology adoption and the learning curve. Should governments subsidize research and development to accelerate technological progress? Should they implement policies to encourage the diffusion of new technologies throughout the economy? These are complex questions with no easy answers. However, a deep understanding of the economic forces at play is essential for making informed decisions. The learning curve also has strategic implications. Firms that are able to learn faster than their competitors gain a significant advantage. They can reduce their costs more rapidly, offer lower prices, and capture a larger market share. This creates a virtuous cycle, as increased market share provides even more opportunities for learning and cost reduction. And the application of AI, machine learning, automated systems is rapidly increasing the rate of improvement along the learning curve. However, it's important to remember that technology adoption isn't always a smooth and linear process. There can be significant challenges and obstacles along the way. Resistance to change, lack of skilled workers, and regulatory hurdles can all slow down the adoption process. It requires careful planning, investment, and a willingness to embrace experimentation. And as we reflect on this interplay of innovation and efficiency, we must ask ourselves, what lies beyond the initial gains of technology adoption? As industries mature and learning curves flatten, where do new sources of competitive advantage emerge? What new dimensions will shape the landscape of production and costs in the years to come? These are the questions that await us as we continue our exploration of the ever-evolving world of economics. Good night. Chapter 23. The role of standard operating procedures, we drift onward. Friends, from the foundational principles of cost structures to a more applied understanding, the orchestration of those costs within the dynamic symphony of a business. Consider it this way. Understanding the individual notes is crucial, but composing a melody requires arrangement, repetition, and a deep understanding of how the instruments interact. Today, we consider the arrangement, embodied in standard operating procedures, or SOPs. SOPs at their core are documented, step-by-step instructions that detail how to perform a specific task. They are essentially the codified best practices of an organization. Think of them as a meticulously crafted recipe, ensuring consistency and quality regardless of who is in the kitchen. But their economic impact stretches far beyond simple consistency. They play a critical role in achieving economies of scale, economies of scope, and navigating the subtle bends of the learning curve. Let's begin with economies of scale. As we established earlier, economies of scale arise when increasing production leads to a decrease in average cost. SOPs contribute to this in several key ways. First, by standardizing processes, they reduce variability. Reduced variability translates directly to reduced waste, less material lost to errors, fewer products failing quality control, and less time spent correcting mistakes. The classical economist, with his focus on efficiency, would undoubtedly champion this aspect of SOPs. Imagine, if you will, an assembly line. Without SOPs, each worker might perform their task slightly differently, leading to inconsistencies and bottlenecks. SOPs smooth the flow, optimizing the utilization of resources and minimizing disruptions. This efficient resource allocation directly contributes to lower average costs as production increases. Furthermore, SOPs facilitate the training of new employees. Rather than relying on informal mentorship or ad hoc instructions, new hires can be trained quickly and effectively using documented procedures. This reduces the learning curve, minimizing the initial period of inefficiency that inevitably accompanies any new role. The policymaker, concerned with workforce development, would recognize the value of SOPs in rapidly integrating new workers into the production process, ensuring a consistent level of productivity. Now, consider economies of scope, the cost advantages derived from producing a variety of products or services. SOPs allow businesses to leverage existing resources and expertise across multiple product lines. A single, well-documented SOP for inventory management, for example, can be adapted and applied to a variety of different products, minimizing the need for separate product-specific procedures. This shared resource utilization is the essence of economies of scope. Think of a restaurant with a master recipe for dough. That one procedure can be used to create pizzas, breads, and pastries, using similar ingredients and equipment. The same principle applies across far more complex organizations. Finally, let's turn to the learning curve. The phenomenon where the cost per unit decreases as cumulative production increases due to accumulated knowledge and experience. SOPs capture and codify this accumulated knowledge. As workers perform tasks repeatedly according to established procedures, they identify areas for improvement. These improvements can then be incorporated into the SOPs, creating a virtuous cycle of continuous optimization. The initial SOP might be based on theoretical best practices, but with time and through application, it transforms into a reflection of practical experience. This iterative refinement, documented and disseminated through SOPs, accelerates the learning curve and drives down costs over time. Moreover, SOPs provide a framework for measuring performance and identifying areas for further improvement. By establishing clear benchmarks and expectations, businesses can track key metrics and identify deviations from the norm. This data-driven approach to process improvement allows organizations to continuously refine their SOPs and optimize their operations. If a particular SOP consistently results in higher error rates, for example, that SOP can be revised and improved. This continuous improvement cycle is essential for maintaining a competitive edge in today's rapidly changing business environment. In essence, SOPs are the glue that holds together the disparate elements of a production process, ensuring consistency, efficiency, and continuous improvement. They are the instruments by which businesses harness the power of economies of scale, economies of scope, and the subtle wisdom of the learning curve. They transform individual actions into a coordinated symphony of economic activity. But how do we measure the effectiveness of these SOPs beyond simple metrics? Are there qualitative factors, perhaps impacting employee morale or innovation, that these procedures might unintentionally suppress? These questions, too, deserve our consideration as we move forward to the next phase of our exploration. Sleep well. Chapter 24. Learning Curve in Service Industries. We've explored the economies of scale and scope, the broad landscapes where increased size or diversified offerings reduce average costs. Now, let's turn our attention to a more nuanced phenomenon, the learning curve, DEL. This concept adds a temporal dimension to our understanding of cost reduction. It's about the gradual efficiency gains that arise from experience, a gentle slope downward in the cost landscape. The learning curve, sometimes called the experience curve, suggests that as a firm accumulates experience in producing a good or service, its average cost of production falls. This decline isn't simply due to increased scale, although those benefits may also contribute. Instead, it stems from the cumulative improvements in processes, techniques, and organizational learning. Think of it as an iterative process of refinement, a continuous feedback loop between doing and understanding. The effect is often expressed as a percentage. A learning rate of 80%, for example, means that each doubling of cumulative output leads to a 20% reduction in unit cost I. So, if the first unit costs $100 to produce, the second unit might cost slightly less, but the cumulative effect is that by the time the firm has produced, say 100 units, the cost per unit is significantly lower than when it started. While often associated with manufacturing, the learning curve is particularly fascinating in service industries. Here, the production process is frequently intangible, involving complex interactions between providers and customers. The classical economist might immediately think of widgets rolling off an assembly line when learning curve is mentioned. But consider a hospital, a consulting firm, or an airline. Their outputs aren't physical objects, but rather episodes of care, advice, or transportation. The opportunity for improvement is often in standardizing protocols, refining communication, and improving coordination between various teams. In service industries, the sources of learning can be varied. It could be improved employee training, leading to faster and more effective service delivery. It might involve implementing new technology to streamline processes. Or it might simply be the accumulation of knowledge about customer preferences, allowing for more personalized and efficient service. The impact of the learning curve can be substantial. A firm that consciously manages its learning process can gain a significant competitive advantage. By reducing costs over time, it can either increase its profit margins or lower its prices, attracting more customers. This advantage is self-reinforcing. As the firm gains market share, it further accumulates experience, leading to even greater cost reductions. The effect creates a kind of virtuous cycle. However, there are limitations to the learning curve. Firstly, it's not automatic. Learning requires active management, investment in training and development, and a willingness to experiment and innovate. A firm that simply repeats the same processes without seeking improvements is unlikely to experience significant cost reductions. Secondly, the learning curve eventually flattens out. There's a limit to how much costs can be reduced. Diminishing returns set in. After a certain point, further increases in experience yield only marginal cost savings. Furthermore, technological advancements can disrupt the learning curve. A new technology might render existing processes obsolete, forcing firms to start anew. This can be both a challenge and an opportunity. Firms that are quick to adopt and adapt to new technologies can gain a competitive advantage, while those that cling to old ways may fall behind. For the policymaker, understanding the learning curve is essential for crafting effective industrial policies. Policies that encourage innovation, investment in human capital, and the diffusion of knowledge can help firms to move down the learning curve more quickly. This can lead to increased productivity, economic growth, and improved living standards. The learning curve is not merely a technical concept. It's a reflection of the dynamic nature of economic activity. It's a reminder that progress is not inevitable, but rather the result of conscious effort, experimentation, and continuous improvement. It highlights the importance of creating an environment that fosters learning and innovation. The question remains, how can firms and policymakers create the conditions for sustained learning, especially in an era of rapid technological change? Perhaps the answer lies in embracing adaptability and focusing on the next frontier, the network effect, where value increases exponentially with user growth. What forces shape its curve, and how can we harness its power for collective benefit? That, perhaps, is a question for our next discussion. Chapter 25. Combining economies of scale, scope, and learning. We've explored the individual landscapes of scale, scope, and learning. Now, imagine them not as separate valleys, but as a gently sloping plane where their influences converge, interact, and ultimately shape the terrain of production costs. Tonight, we'll contemplate the synergistic dance between these three forces, understanding how their combined effect can lead to particularly profound advantages. The concept of economies of scale, you'll recall, focuses on reducing the average cost per unit as production volume increases. Think of the grand automated assembly line, a significant initial investment, yes, but one that unlocks efficiencies as the sheer quantity of output grows. Large-scale operations can spread fixed cost, the overhead, the machinery, across a greater number of units, driving down the cost attributable to each. It's a story of spreading the blanket further to cover more. But scale alone is not always the answer. Enter economies of scope. This principle considers the cost advantages derived from producing a variety of goods or services within a single enterprise. Rather than focusing on mass production of a single item, the firm finds ways to leverage shared resources, technologies, distribution networks, even brand reputation, across multiple product lines. Consider the conglomerate, carefully balancing seemingly disparate divisions under a common banner, each benefiting from the collective infrastructure. The synergy here is about sharing the river, rather than widening a single channel. The beauty of these two forces lies in their potential compatibility. A firm achieving economies of scale in the production of individual components might then utilize those components across a diverse range of final products, achieving economies of scope at the assembly stage. This is a delicate balance, a symphony of optimization. And then, the element of time enters, bringing us to the realm of learning curves. As a firm accumulates experience in a particular production process, its efficiency improves. Workers become more skilled, processes are streamlined, and waste is reduced. This cumulative knowledge, the echo of past efforts, gradually translates into lower costs per unit. It's a process of refinement, of slowly polishing a stone to reveal its inherent beauty. The astute manager, the thoughtful policymaker, understands that these three forces are not mutually exclusive. They can be orchestrated to create a virtuous cycle. For instance, a firm might initially invest in large-scale production to achieve economies of scale. This increased volume allows for greater experimentation and learning, driving down costs further. Simultaneously, the firm may diversify its product line to leverage its growing expertise and infrastructure, achieving economies of scope. The gains from each reinforces the others. Think of it as three streams converging into a powerful current, capable of turning the wheels of industry with considerable force. However, there are limits. Unfettered growth, driven purely by the pursuit of scale, can lead to diseconomies, bureaucratic inefficiencies, communication breakdowns, a loss of agility. Similarly, excessive diversification, stretching resources too thin, can erode the benefits of scope. And while learning is generally beneficial, relying solely on past practices can stifle innovation and prevent the adoption of new, potentially superior methods. The successful firm, therefore, constantly monitors the interplay between these forces, adjusting its strategy to maintain a harmonious equilibrium. It embraces scale where appropriate, cultivates scope where it adds value, and nurtures a culture of continuous learning. It strives not for simplistic maximization, but for elegant optimization, a fluid balance between seemingly competing pressures. The classical economist might advise restraint and specialization, focusing on the inherent limitations. The policymaker might advocate for interventions to mitigate the risks of excessive concentration. Both viewpoints, while valid, represent only fragments of the whole. The art lies in recognizing that economic advantage is not a static condition, but a dynamic process of adaptation and refinement. And so, we reach the end of our contemplation for this evening. But, as we drift towards sleep, consider this. We've analyzed these forces primarily from the perspective of production. But what happens when we shift our focus to the consumer? How do these same principles shape consumption patterns and influence the overall structure of demand? This is a question that will occupy our thoughts in the days to come, as we explore the landscape beyond production, into the realm of markets themselves. Chapter 26. The Strategic Interplay, a Holistic View. Welcome back. Last time, we touched upon the foundational elements of factor markets, the rivers that feed the economic landscape. Tonight, we delve deeper, examining how production itself reshapes those very landscapes. Our focus shifts to the strategic interplay of production and costs, viewed through the lens of economies of scale, scope, and the subtle yet profound influence of learning curves. Imagine, if you will, a finely tuned orchestra, each instrument working in concert to produce a symphony of efficiency. Economies of scale, at their heart, represent the cost advantages a firm accrues as it increases its output. It's the simple, yet powerful, principle that bigger can sometimes be better. Think of a small artisan workshop compared to a large factory. The workshop, with its limited space and tools, produces goods at a relatively high cost per unit. The factory, on the other hand, with its specialized machinery and division of labor, achieves a lower cost per unit due to the spreading of fixed costs over a larger volume of output. This spreading is the essence of scale economies. There is, however, a limit. Beyond a certain point, a firm may encounter diseconomies of scale. Coordination becomes unwieldy, communication breaks down, and bureaucracy stifles innovation. The orchestra becomes too large, the conductor struggles to maintain control, and the music suffers. Now, consider economies of scope. This concept transcends mere volume. It's about the strategic advantage gained by producing a variety of goods or services within the same firm. Imagine a bakery that not only bakes bread, but also prepares pastries and cakes. The shared resources, such as ovens, mixers, and skilled bakers, allow the bakery to produce a diverse range of products at a lower cost than if each product were produced by a separate specialized firm. This shared resource utilization unlocks the power of scope. The key is the synergy. The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. The policymaker often tries to promote industries that can benefit from scope economies as it leads to greater consumer choice and greater economic resilience. But the story doesn't end there. Enter the learning curve. This concept embodies the gradual improvement in efficiency that comes with experience. As a firm produces more of a particular product, its workers become more skilled, its processes become more refined, and its overall efficiency improves. This increased efficiency translates directly into lower costs. Imagine a master craftsman honing their skills over years of dedicated practice. Each repetition, each perfected movement, reduces the time and effort required to create a masterpiece. The learning curve is a testament to the power of repetition, adaptation, and the relentless pursuit of improvement. The classical economist recognized this long ago, observing that sustained productivity gains arise not merely from capital investment, but from the accumulation of knowledge and expertise within an organization. The interplay of these three forces, scale, scope, and learning, is what truly shapes the competitive landscape. A firm might initially seek economies of scale to reduce its production costs. As it grows, it might then explore economies of scope to diversify its offerings and cater to a wider range of customer needs. And throughout this journey, the firm continuously learns and improves, further reducing its costs and enhancing its competitive advantage. It's a dynamic process, a constant dance of adaptation and innovation. Think of a modern technology company. They often start with a single, innovative product. They then scale up production to meet growing demand, leveraging economies of scale. They expand into related product lines, capitalizing on economies of scope. And all the while, they invest heavily in research and development, constantly learning and improving their products and processes, pushing themselves down the learning curve. This holistic approach is key to long-term success. Understanding these principles allows the policymaker to make informed decisions about industrial policy, competition regulation, and investment incentives. Promoting industries with the potential for significant scale or scope economies can lead to greater efficiency and lower prices for consumers. Fostering a culture of learning and innovation can drive long-term productivity growth and enhance a nation's competitiveness. As we contemplate the interconnectedness of production and costs, we are left with a fundamental question. What are the limitations of the learning curve? At what point does the rate of improvement plateau, and what new strategies must firms adopt to maintain their competitive edge? This will be our point of departure in the next exploration of market dynamics. Good night. Chapter 27. Case Study. Automotive Industry, Mass Production. Introduction. Good evening. We've been traversing the landscape of production, and like any seasoned traveler, it's wise to pause to consider a landmark. Let's now turn our gaze to a specific example, a crucible where many of these principles were first forged in fire and steel. The automotive industry, specifically, the era of mass production. We will explore how economies of scale, scope, and the subtle, yet powerful influence of learning curves shaped its very essence. Economies of scale, the assembly line. Imagine, if you will, a workshop. Craftsmen meticulously assembling each vehicle, each a unique creation. Now, contrast that with the sprawling factories of the early 20th century, the birthplace of mass production. The shift was profound, driven primarily by economies of scale. As production volume increased, the cost per unit decreased. This wasn't mere happenstance. It was a consequence of several factors. Firstly, the fixed costs, the initial investment in machinery, the factory itself, were spread across a larger number of vehicles. Think of it as a single large stone cast into a pond. The ripples spread wider as the stone grows in size, diminishing in intensity at any given point. Secondly, specialization became the norm. Rather than a single craftsman building an entire car, individual workers focused on specific tasks, repeated ad infinitum. This division of labor, a concept championed by the classical economists centuries prior, led to increased efficiency. Workers became adept at their assigned role, reducing errors and increasing output. The flow of production became smoother, a well-oiled machine, rather than a series of isolated efforts. However, these efficiencies came at a cost. The repetitive nature of the work could lead to worker alienation and a reduction in job satisfaction. Finding the balance between efficiency and human well-being remains a constant challenge, a delicate equation to solve. Economies of scope, beyond the basic model. While economies of scale focused on producing a large volume of a single product, economies of scope explored the potential benefits of producing a variety of products within the same organization. In the automotive industry, this manifested in the diversification of models. Instead of focusing solely on one type of car, manufacturers began producing sedans, trucks, and eventually, even recreational vehicles. This allowed them to leverage their existing infrastructure and expertise across a wider range of markets. The factory, once dedicated to a single, monolithic output, became a versatile ecosystem. Marketing and distribution networks could be utilized more efficiently, spreading the cost across a broader product portfolio. The potential pitfalls, however, involved increased complexity in management and potential for diseconomies of scope if the different product lines were not properly integrated. The policymaker had to carefully weigh the benefits of diversification against the potential for fragmentation. Learning curves, the accumulation of knowledge. Now, consider the subtle, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly impactful phenomenon of the learning curve. As workers and managers gained experience in the production process, they became more efficient, even without significant technological advancements. They discovered shortcuts, refined processes, and identified areas for improvement. The cost per unit decreased, not just because of scale, but because of accumulated knowledge. This learning effect was not confined to the factory floor. It permeated every aspect of the business, from design and engineering to marketing and sales. Each vehicle built, each marketing campaign launched, provided valuable data, feeding back into the system and driving further improvements. This continuous cycle of learning and refinement is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the importance of organizational memory. The philosopher might even argue that this constant improvement reflects a fundamental drive towards perfection. Conclusion: the automotive industry, during its mass production phase, offers a compelling illustration of the power of economies of scale, scope, and learning curves. It's a story of ambition, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of efficiency. But the story doesn't end here. As we move further into the post-industrial age, the focus shifts from mass production to mass customization, and these principles will need to be reevaluated, adapted, and perhaps even challenged. What new economic forces will shape the next phase of the automotive industry? A question for our next exploration, perhaps. Chapter 28. Case Study. Tech Industry, Software Development, Ah, yes. We've spent some time traversing the theoretical landscapes of production and costs. Now, let us gently steer our focus towards a concrete example, a real-world illustration of these principles in action. Tonight, our lens will settle upon the vibrant, ever-evolving world of the technology industry, specifically, the realm of software development. Consider, if you will, a fledgling software startup. Initially, its production, the lines of code written, the features built, the bugs squashed, is modest. The costs, however, are often substantial. They include the salaries of the developers, the cost of the hardware and software tools, and the expenses associated with marketing and sales. At this early stage, the startup likely experiences relatively high average costs per unit of software produced. This is where the concept of economies of scale comes into play. As the startup grows, as its software gains traction, and as its user base expands, it can leverage its existing infrastructure to serve more customers without a proportional increase in costs. Think about it. The initial investment in the software platform, the core architecture, is largely fixed. Whether it serves 1,000 users or 1 million, the fundamental infrastructure remains the same. The marginal cost of serving an additional user, of providing access to the software to another individual, becomes exceedingly small. This decrease in average cost as production increases is the essence of economies of scale. The larger the user base, the more effectively these fixed costs are spread, leading to greater profitability. But scale isn't the only avenue to cost optimization. Let's consider economies of scope. This principle arises when a firm can produce two or more different products or services at a lower cost than it could produce them separately. In the software world, this might manifest as a company that initially develops a single application, deciding to expand its offerings to include a suite of complementary tools. For example, a company specializing in project management software might then develop a time-tracking application or an invoicing system. By leveraging the same development team, the same customer support infrastructure, and the same marketing channels, the company can produce these related products at a lower cost than if each were developed and marketed by separate entities. Synergy, you see, becomes the guiding force, a harmonious blending of capabilities. And now, let us turn our attention to the fascinating phenomenon of learning curves. This describes the relationship between the cumulative volume of production and the cost per unit. As a firm produces more and more of a particular product, its workers become more efficient, its processes become more refined, and its designs become more optimized. In the context of software development, this might involve developers becoming more proficient in a particular programming language or becoming adept at using a specific software development tool. As a team works together on multiple projects, they develop shared knowledge, improve their communication, and streamline their workflows. The result? Faster development times, fewer errors, and lower costs per line of code. The curve slopes downward, a testament to the power of repeated experience and incremental improvement. The classical economist, observing all of this, might point out the delicate balance between these forces. Expanding too rapidly without proper planning can lead to diseconomies of scale, where the complexity of managing a larger organization outweighs the benefits of size. Diversifying into too many unrelated products can dilute focus and increase costs rather than reduce them. And a failure to invest in training and development can prevent a firm from fully realizing the benefits of learning curves. The policymaker, meanwhile, would be interested in the implications of these economies for market structure. Economies of scale can lead to natural monopolies, where a single firm can serve the entire market at a lower cost than any other firm. Economies of scope can encourage firms to merge or acquire other companies, creating larger, more diversified entities. And learning curves can create barriers to entry, making it difficult for new firms to compete with established players. Thus, the gentle hand of regulation must carefully attend to these dynamics, ensuring that the pursuit of efficiency does not come at the expense of competition and innovation. So, as our hour wanes, we observe that the tech industry, particularly software development, serves as a compelling case study in the practical application of production and cost principles. The pursuit of economies of scale, scope, and the harnessing of learning curves are constant objectives, shaping both business strategy and public policy. But as technology continues to evolve at an ever-accelerating pace, how will these fundamental economic forces adapt, and what new challenges will they present? That, my friends, is a question for another night, another chapter in our continuing exploration. Chapter 29, Case Study. Pharmaceutical Industry, Drug Discovery. Good evening. Having explored the theoretical underpinnings of production and cost, let's now gently steer our focus towards a tangible example: the pharmaceutical industry, specifically the realm of drug discovery. It's a complex, expensive, and ultimately vital field, one where economies of scale, scope, and the relentless pursuit of learning play pivotal roles in shaping both success and failure. Think of it as a microcosm of the larger economic landscape, a place where abstract principles become concrete realities. Consider first the concept of economies of scale. In drug discovery, these economies are often elusive, particularly in the early stages of research. The initial investment in facilities, equipment like high-throughput screening robots, and a skilled scientific workforce is substantial. However, the marginal cost of screening additional compounds might seem initially low. We can picture the initial expenditure as creating a vast, fertile field. But merely having the field does not guarantee a bountiful harvest. The success rate of any single compound progressing from initial screening to a market-ready drug is notoriously low, often below 1%. This high failure rate mitigates any simple economies of scale derived from increased screening volume. The fixed costs are amortized over a tiny number of successful products, each carrying the weight of countless failed experiments. Therefore, large pharmaceutical companies, while seemingly benefiting from scale due to their size and resources, are also vulnerable to the inherent risks associated with this unpredictable innovation process. Now, let's turn our attention to economies of scope. These arise when producing a variety of related products is cheaper than producing each one separately. In the pharmaceutical industry, this manifests in several ways. A company with expertise in a particular therapeutic area, such as oncology or neurology, can leverage its existing knowledge base, research infrastructure, and established clinical trial networks to develop new drugs within that area more efficiently than a company starting from scratch. Furthermore, a company with a diverse portfolio of drugs can better weather the inevitable failures and regulatory hurdles associated with individual products. Imagine the company as a diversified investment portfolio. Some ventures will flourish, while others falter, but the overall portfolio remains robust. Platform technologies, such as gene therapy or antibody engineering, also contribute to economies of scope. A company that has invested in developing a robust platform can then apply it to a range of different diseases, spreading the development costs and risks across multiple potential products. This also enables them to rapidly adapt to emerging scientific discoveries and therapeutic opportunities. Finally, we must consider the power of the learning curve. Drug discovery is an iterative process built upon countless experiments, clinical trials, and regulatory interactions. Each failure and each success provides valuable lessons that can be applied to future projects. As scientists and researchers gain experience, they become more efficient at identifying promising drug candidates, designing effective clinical trials, and navigating the complex regulatory landscape. Think of each failed experiment as a lesson etched into the collective memory of the organization. Over time, these accumulated lessons translate into faster development times, lower development costs, and a higher probability of success. Furthermore, the establishment of robust knowledge management systems, which capture and disseminate these lessons learned, is crucial for maximizing the benefits of the learning curve. The policymaker might consider incentives for data sharing and collaboration to accelerate this learning process across the industry. The classical economist might argue that the pharmaceutical industry, due to its inherent risk and complexity, represents a particularly challenging environment for achieving significant economies of scale. However, economies of scope and the power of the learning curve offer pathways to improved efficiency and innovation. The effective management of these factors can ultimately lead to the development of new and effective treatments for a wide range of diseases. As we conclude this examination of the pharmaceutical industry, a question lingers in the air, like the scent of a forgotten experiment. How do government policies, specifically intellectual property rights and regulatory frameworks, interact with these economies of scale, scope, and learning. This is the next phase of the inquiry, the next layer of complexity to gently peel back. Chapter 30. Global Supply Chains and Economies of Scale. Good evening. Last time, we considered the delicate dance of market structures, observing how different competitive pressures shape firm behavior. Tonight, we delve into the heart of production itself, exploring the powerful forces that drive firms to expand, to integrate, and to seek efficiencies across vast distances. Economies of scale, scope, and the subtly transformative learning curve. Think of these as the underlying currents that shape the landscape of global supply chains, the invisible architectures upon which modern commerce rests. Let's begin with economies of scale. This is perhaps the most intuitively understood concept. Imagine a small bakery, painstakingly crafting each loaf of bread. Now, picture a massive industrial bakery, churning out thousands of loaves per hour. The larger bakery benefits from economies of scale. Simply put, as production increases, the average cost per unit decreases. This happens for several reasons. First, there's the spreading of fixed costs. Rent, machinery, management salaries, these costs remain relatively constant regardless of the output. The classical economist recognized early on that when these fixed costs are distributed over a larger number of units, the cost burden on each individual loaf diminishes significantly. Think of it as diluting a potent concentrate. The more water you add, the weaker the flavor, but the more you have to enjoy. Then there's specialization and division of labor. The large bakery can divide the production process into highly specialized tasks. One person mixes the dough, another shapes it, another monitors the oven. This specialization leads to greater efficiency and expertise, reducing errors and waste. Compare this to the small bakery where the baker must be a jack of all trades, less proficient in any single aspect. The division of labor, when carefully orchestrated, becomes a symphony of efficiency. However, economies of scale aren't limitless. Eventually, diseconomies of scale can emerge. At a certain point, the sheer size of the operation can lead to coordination problems, communication breakdowns, and bureaucratic inefficiencies. Imagine the industrial bakery growing so large that it becomes unwieldy, slow to adapt, and prone to internal conflict. The policymaker must always be aware of this delicate balance, expanding to capture the benefits of scale, but remaining agile enough to avoid the pitfalls of excessive size. It's a tightrope walk between efficiency and inertia. Now, let's turn our attention to economies of scope. This concept goes beyond simply producing more of the same thing. Economies of scope arise when producing different goods or services together is cheaper than producing them separately. Think of a farmer who grows both wheat and barley. If the same equipment, land, and labor can be used for both crops, the farmer benefits from economies of scope. The cost of producing both crops together is less than the combined cost of producing them independently. Another example is a car manufacturer that produces both sedans and SUVs. They can share the same research and development, manufacturing facilities, and distribution networks. The cost savings from this shared infrastructure create economies of scope. This principle encourages diversification and integration across product lines, creating complex ecosystems of related goods and services. It's like a well-tended garden where different plants support each other, creating a richer, more resilient whole. Finally, we have the learning curve, sometimes referred to as economies of learning. This is a subtler, more dynamic form of cost reduction. It acknowledges that as a firm produces more of a product, it learns how to do it more efficiently. Workers become more skilled, processes are streamlined, and mistakes are reduced. The policymaker understands this curve very well and will incentivize industries to grow because, although unseen, the learning benefits are valuable. Consider an aircraft manufacturer. The first few airplanes they produce will be expensive and time-consuming to build. But as they gain experience, they will find ways to improve the production process, reduce waste, and shorten lead times. The cost of each subsequent airplane will gradually decline as the firm climbs the learning curve. This dynamic process of learning and improvement is a crucial source of competitive advantage, allowing firms to continuously reduce costs and enhance quality. These three concepts, economies of scale, scope, and learning, are fundamental drivers of firm behavior and global supply chain design. They explain why firms seek to expand their operations, diversify their product lines, and continuously innovate to improve efficiency. They are the hidden engines of economic growth, constantly reshaping the landscape of global commerce. But as global supply chains become increasingly complex and interconnected, are they truly resilient to shocks and disruptions? Or have we created a system so finely tuned to efficiency that it is vulnerable to unexpected events? This is a question we shall begin to explore next time. Chapter 31. Outsourcing and its impact on production costs. Paragraph 1. Having considered the foundational principles of production functions, we now turn our attention to a potent strategic tool employed by firms seeking to optimize their cost structures: outsourcing. Think of it as a delicate rebalancing of the internal and external forces acting upon a business. Outsourcing, at its core, involves contracting out specific business functions or processes to external providers, often located in different geographical regions. Its allure stems from the potential to drastically alter the dynamics of production costs, particularly when viewed through the lenses of economies of scale, scope, and learning curves. Paragraph 2. Let's first address economies of scale. Recall that these economies are realized when the average cost of production decreases as output increases. When a firm outsources a particular function, say customer service, it essentially aggregates its demand for that service with the demand of other firms served by the same external provider. This provider, now operating at a much larger scale than any single firm could achieve internally, can leverage its resources more efficiently. They can invest in specialized technology, employ a larger, more specialized workforce, and benefit from bulk purchasing discounts. The result? Lower average costs for everyone, including the firm that initiated the outsourcing arrangement. It's a symbiotic relationship, a tide that lifts all boats, provided the currents are carefully navigated. Paragraph 3. Economies of scope, on the other hand, relate to the cost advantages gained from producing a variety of related goods or services under a single roof, or in this case through a strategically interconnected network. While outsourcing might seem to narrow the scope of a single firm's internal operations, it can paradoxically broaden its access to a wider range of specialized capabilities. A manufacturing firm, for instance, might outsource its logistics operations, thereby gaining access to a sophisticated global distribution network that it could never have developed on its own. This outsourced network allows the manufacturing firm to reach new markets, offer more customized delivery options, and ultimately expand its overall scope of operations, all without the burden of directly managing a complex logistical enterprise. It is a shedding of one's skin to reveal a stronger, more adaptable form beneath. Paragraph 4. The impact of outsourcing on learning curves is equally compelling. The learning curve effect posits that the cost of producing a good or service decreases over time as a firm accumulates experience and expertise in its production process. When a firm outsources a specific function, it is essentially transferring that learning curve to the external provider. This provider, specializing in that particular function and serving multiple clients, can rapidly accumulate experience and improve its efficiency at a much faster rate than the firm could have achieved internally. Consider a software company outsourcing its coding activities. The external coding firm, dedicated solely to coding and working on diverse projects, will likely develop superior coding skills and techniques much faster than the software company's internal coding team. The software company then benefits from the accelerated learning curve of its outsourced partner, receiving higher quality code at a lower cost, and freeing internal resources for other strategic endeavors. Paragraph 5. However, the relationship is not without its potential pitfalls. The classical economists warned us about the dangers of overspecialization, of becoming overly reliant on external entities. Dependency, loss of control, communication challenges, and the risk of intellectual property theft are all legitimate concerns that must be carefully addressed when considering outsourcing. The policymaker, in turn, must consider the societal impacts of outsourcing, particularly on domestic employment and wage levels. Finding the right balance, ensuring fair labor practices, and fostering innovation within the domestic economy are critical considerations. Paragraph 6. Moreover, the transaction costs associated with outsourcing, such as the costs of searching for suitable providers, negotiating contracts, and monitoring performance, must be carefully weighed against the potential cost savings. If these transaction costs are too high, the benefits of outsourcing may be eroded. It's akin to navigating a turbulent river. The potential for a faster journey exists, but requires careful steering and a keen awareness of hidden obstacles. Paragraph 7. In essence, outsourcing represents a strategic decision with profound implications for production costs and overall firm performance. When implemented thoughtfully and strategically, it can unlock significant economies of scale, broaden the scope of operations, and leverage the power of learning curves. However, a careless approach can lead to increased risks, higher transaction costs, and ultimately, a detrimental impact on the firm's bottom line. It's a tool, like any other, whose effectiveness hinges on the skill and wisdom of the wielder. Paragraph 8. As we prepare to explore the intricacies of cost accounting and its role in managerial decision-making, a fundamental question remains: how do firms accurately measure and allocate the true costs associated with both internal and outsourced activities? And how can these insights be used to optimize resource allocation and maximize profitability in an increasingly interconnected global economy? We'll delve into these matters in the coming chapter. Chapter 32. Automation and its influence on economies of scale and learning. Yes. We've traversed the familiar landscape of production functions, mapping inputs to outputs. Now, let us consider how the relentless march of automation redefines the very nature of economies of scale and the tantalizing prospect of the learning curve. Imagine it as a gentle stream diverting, finding new pathways through the terrain, ultimately shaping the landscape in unforeseen ways. Recall the fundamental principle of economies of scale. As production volume increases, average costs decrease. This stems from the spreading of fixed costs, the rent on the factory, the salary of the CEO, over a larger number of units. Traditional economies of scale often relied on physical expansion. Larger factories, more machines, more workers. This expansion, however, is often hampered by logistical challenges, managerial complexity, and the ever-present specter of diminishing returns. These limits acted like a dam, holding back the potential of scale. Automation, in its purest form, chips away at this dam. Consider the modern data center. With sophisticated software and robotic systems, a single physical location can manage an exponentially larger flow of information and transactions than was conceivable just a few decades ago. The fixed costs, predominantly the infrastructure and the initial software development, are spread across a vast sea of digital services, driving down the cost per transaction to near negligible levels. The reliance on human labor for repetitive tasks diminishes, reducing a major source of variable cost and variability itself. It smooths the bumps in the road. This allows smaller companies, or those with less initial capital, to scale more quickly and efficiently than their predecessors. The barriers to entry crumble somewhat. It is no longer strictly necessary to build massive physical plants to compete. The clever application of automation can level the playing field. Now, let's turn our attention to economies of scope, the ability to produce a variety of related goods or services more cheaply than producing them separately. Traditionally, achieving economies of scope required significant capital investment in specialized equipment and retraining of the workforce. Think of a car factory that needed entirely new tooling to manufacture trucks. The classical economist observed the high cost of reconfiguration. Automation, particularly with the advent of flexible manufacturing systems and artificial intelligence, offers a different avenue. A single automated production line, guided by sophisticated algorithms and adaptable robots, can be quickly reconfigured to produce a range of related products. This allows companies to cater to niche markets and personalize products without sacrificing the cost advantages of mass production. The factory becomes a chrysalis, effortlessly morphing its output to meet demand. Finally, we arrive at the learning curve, the observation that as cumulative production increases, the cost of producing each unit decreases due to improved efficiency and knowledge. This is a natural progression, a refining process where mistakes are learned from and processes are optimized. Traditionally, the learning curve was primarily driven by human experience. Workers becoming more skilled, managers identifying bottlenecks, engineers refining designs. It flowed as naturally as a stream through a canyon. Automation accelerates this process. Machine learning algorithms can analyze vast quantities of production data, identify patterns invisible to the human eye, and continuously optimize processes in real time. The feedback loop becomes tighter and faster. The rate of learning increases exponentially, leading to steeper learning curves and more rapid cost reductions. It is like adding a turbine to the stream, accelerating the current. The policymaker is often concerned about the distributional effects of these advancements. While automation undoubtedly boosts overall productivity and economic growth, it also raises concerns about job displacement and the need for workforce retraining. The balance between efficiency and equity becomes ever more delicate. We find ourselves at a fascinating juncture. Automation is not simply a technological advancement. It is a fundamental reshaping of the economic landscape. It alters the dynamics of economies of scale, facilitates economies of scope, and accelerates the learning curve. It creates new opportunities, but also presents new challenges. The gentle stream continues to flow, carving out a new path. As we look ahead, one wonders what the next phase of this evolution will bring. Will quantum computing and truly sentient AI further erode the traditional limits of economies of scale and scope? Will the concept of the learning curve become obsolete, replaced by a constant state of optimization? These are questions that await our further exploration, perhaps tomorrow night. Chapter 33. Digital Transformation and Economies of Scope. Ah, yes. We've drifted from the churning waters of pure scale, where size alone seemed to promise salvation. Now, imagine the landscape broadening, the economic terrain shifting beneath our feet. We move from the singular mountain of scale to a connected plateau, where valleys of specialization feed into peaks of integrated output. Tonight, we explore economies of scope and how digital transformation has reshaped this crucial concept. Economies of scope, at their heart, represent the cost advantages gained by producing a variety of related goods or services within a single firm. Think of it as the economic equivalent of a well-balanced ecosystem, where different species coexist and support each other, leading to greater overall efficiency. It's a departure from the linear simplicity of scale, where increasing production of a single item lowers its average cost. Instead, we're considering the cost benefits derived from shared resources and expertise across multiple product lines. Consider, for instance, a traditional printing company. Years ago, its primary revenue stream came from printing books and magazines. Achieving economies of scale in this market involved investing in larger, faster printing presses and streamlining the production process for these standardized formats. However, with the advent of digital printing and the rise of personalized marketing, the company faced a challenge. Adapting required not simply more of the same, but a diversification of capabilities. Here, the principles of economies of scope come into play. The printing company could leverage its existing infrastructure, its design team, its marketing department, its distribution network, to offer new services like custom brochures, personalized mailers, and even digital marketing campaigns. The cost of adding these services would be lower within the existing firm than if a separate entity were to start from scratch, building its own infrastructure and expertise. This synergistic effect, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, embodies the essence of economies of scope. The digital transformation has amplified the potential for economies of scope in profound ways. Cloud computing, for example, allows companies to access and share computing resources across different departments and product lines, reducing redundancy and lowering infrastructure costs. Data analytics tools enable firms to gain a deeper understanding of their customers' needs and preferences, allowing them to tailor their offerings and cross-sell related products more effectively. The proliferation of digital channels, from e-commerce websites to social media platforms, provides companies with new avenues to reach their target audiences and build brand awareness across multiple product categories. The classical economist might argue that focusing on a single product allows for greater specialization and efficiency. However, in a dynamic and rapidly changing market, the ability to adapt and offer a diverse range of products and services can be a crucial competitive advantage. Furthermore, economies of scope can provide a hedge against market fluctuations. If demand for one product declines, the firm can rely on its other offerings to maintain its revenue stream. The policymaker, grappling with questions of antitrust and market concentration, must consider the potential benefits and drawbacks of economies of scope. On the one hand, they can lead to lower prices and greater product variety for consumers. On the other hand, they can also create barriers to entry for smaller firms, potentially leading to reduced competition and innovation. The key is to strike a balance, ensuring that companies can realize the benefits of economies of scope without stifling competition or harming consumer welfare. Looking ahead, the boundaries between industries are blurring, and the lines between physical and digital products are becoming increasingly indistinct. The future belongs to those firms that can master the art of combining seemingly disparate capabilities to create innovative and valuable offerings. But as artificial intelligence and machine learning continue to evolve, will the benefits of scope eventually shift again, favoring highly specialized AI-driven enterprises, or will the adaptability and breadth of human-led organizations continue to prevail? Chapter 34. The rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Last time, we touched upon the shifting sands of labor markets, the quiet upheaval driven by automation. Tonight we delve deeper, examining how artificial intelligence and machine learning are reshaping the very foundations of production, and by extension the delicate architecture of costs within the modern enterprise. The concepts of economies of scale, scope, and learning curves, these are no longer simply theoretical constructs confined to textbooks. They are instead living, breathing principles, experiencing profound metamorphosis under the influence of these powerful computational forces. Let us begin with economies of scale. Traditionally, these arose from the ability to spread fixed costs over a larger volume of production. Think of a vast steel mill. The initial investment is enormous, but as output increases, the cost per unit diminishes. AI and machine learning amplify this effect, creating possibilities for scale that were previously unimaginable. Intelligent systems can manage complex production processes with minimal marginal cost, allowing firms to expand output without a proportional increase in human capital. A single, sophisticated AI can, in essence, oversee the operations of multiple plants, coordinating logistics, optimizing resource allocation, and predicting potential bottlenecks with an accuracy that surpasses any human manager. This is not merely about increasing output, it's about increasing efficient output, creating economies of scale on a scale previously unseen. Consider, too, the notion of economies of scope. This refers to the cost advantages gained by producing a diverse range of products or services under a single roof. Traditionally, diversification required significant investment in specialized equipment and training. AI, however, allows for a much more flexible and adaptable production system. A machine learning algorithm, trained on a vast dataset of customer preferences and market trends, can identify opportunities for product diversification that would be invisible to the human eye. More importantly, it can then adapt the production process to accommodate these new products with minimal disruption. A factory that once produced only automobiles could, with the aid of AI, seamlessly transition to producing electric vehicles, solar panels, or even entirely unrelated goods, all within the same infrastructure. The limiting factor shifts from physical constraints to the availability of data and the sophistication of the algorithms employed. And then there is the learning curve, perhaps the most profoundly affected of all. The learning curve, as you recall, describes the decrease in production cost as cumulative output increases, reflecting the gains in efficiency that come with experience. Traditionally, this was a gradual process, driven by the slow accumulation of tacit knowledge within the workforce. AI and machine learning accelerate this process exponentially. An AI system can analyze vast quantities of data generated by the production process, identifying patterns and inefficiencies that would take human workers years, even decades, to uncover. It can then use this knowledge to optimize the process in real time, constantly refining its algorithms and pushing the boundaries of efficiency. The learning curve, once a gentle slope, becomes a near vertical drop. The classical economist might have observed this as a revolutionary jump in technological advancement. This rapid accumulation of knowledge is not just about improving existing processes. It's about creating entirely new ones, unlocking possibilities that were previously considered impossible. Furthermore, the integration of AI and machine learning is not simply about automating existing tasks. It's about creating fundamentally new forms of production. Consider the rise of personalized medicine, where treatments are tailored to the unique genetic makeup of each individual. This level of customization would be impossible without the ability to analyze vast amounts of data and develop predictive models using sophisticated algorithms. AI enables the creation of goods and services that are not only more efficient, but also more responsive to individual needs, blurring the lines between mass production and bespoke craftsmanship. The policymaker now faces a difficult challenge. While these developments promise significant economic benefits, increased productivity, lower costs, and greater innovation, they also raise important questions about the future of work and the distribution of wealth. As AI takes on an increasing share of production, what will be the role of human labor? How do we ensure that the benefits of this technological revolution are shared by all, not just a select few? These are not easy questions to answer, and they will require careful consideration and thoughtful policy interventions. But one thing is clear: the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning is transforming the landscape of production, reshaping the economics of scale, scope, and learning curves in ways that we are only beginning to understand. And as we see the economic paradigm shift, what unknown economic force lurks on the horizon? Big data and its role in optimizing production costs. Having explored the foundational structures of market equilibrium, our journey now gently meanders into the realm of production. We will examine how the vast ocean of data swirling around us is reshaping the principles of production costs, particularly those timeless concepts of economies of scale, scope, and learning curves. Imagine, if you will, a serene lake. Previously, we navigated by the stars, using intuition and broad economic principles. Now we have sonar, mapping the depths and contours with unprecedented precision. The bedrock principle upon which much of modern production rests is that of economies of scale. The classical economist understood this intuitively. As production volume increases, the average cost per unit tends to decrease. This arises from a confluence of factors: specialization of labor, efficient use of capital, and spreading fixed costs over a larger number of units. Traditionally, businesses gauged the point where economies of scale gave way to diseconomies, that moment where increased complexity and bureaucratic overhead started to erode the cost advantages. However, big data has fundamentally altered this calculation. With the granular detail afforded by vast datasets, tracking everything from raw material prices in real time to the energy consumption of individual machines, businesses can identify and exploit economies of scale with far greater accuracy. Imagine a manufacturing plant, once operating on broad averages. Now, sensors monitor the performance of each machine, predicting maintenance needs before breakdowns occur. Data analytics optimize production schedules, minimizing idle time and maximizing throughput. The policymaker can now access detailed dashboards showing the real-time impact of policy changes on production costs, enabling more informed decision-making. Then there are economies of scope, a closely related concept, but subtly different. This refers to the cost advantages that arise when producing a variety of goods or services within a single firm. Consider a company that originally manufactured only automobiles. By leveraging its existing infrastructure, distribution networks, and brand reputation, it expands into producing electric vehicles, motorcycles, and even bicycles. The cost of producing these diverse products together is lower than if each were produced by a separate, specialized firm. Big data enhances economies of scope by providing insights into cross-selling opportunities, shared resource utilization, and optimal product bundling strategies. Customer data, gleaned from online transactions and social media, reveals patterns of demand and preferences that were previously hidden. This allows businesses to tailor their offerings, optimize their product mix, and exploit synergistic relationships between different product lines. Imagine a large e-commerce platform, able to predict with astonishing accuracy which products a customer is likely to purchase next, based on their past behavior and browsing history. This granular knowledge is the fuel that powers economies of scope in the digital age. Finally, we arrive at the learning curve, a phenomenon that describes the improvement in efficiency and productivity that occurs as individuals and organizations gain experience. As workers repeat a task, they become more skilled, identify shortcuts, and develop better work habits. This leads to a reduction in the time and cost required to complete the task. The classical economist understood this as a gradual process of tacit knowledge accumulation. Big data dramatically accelerates the learning curve. By capturing and analyzing data on individual performance, process bottlenecks, and error rates, businesses can identify best practices and disseminate them across the organization. Imagine a call center, where every interaction is recorded and analyzed. Machine learning algorithms identify the communication techniques that lead to the highest customer satisfaction and the fastest resolution times. This knowledge is then used to train new employees and improve the performance of existing agents, driving down costs and enhancing customer service. The flow of information becomes a self-improving loop. The power of big data lies not simply in its volume, but in its ability to unlock hidden efficiencies, optimize resource allocation, and accelerate the accumulation of knowledge. It is a tool that allows us to navigate the complexities of production with greater precision and foresight. As we move forward, the question remains: how will the increasing sophistication of artificial intelligence further amplify these effects? And what ethical considerations must we navigate as machines increasingly guide the production process? A question for another day, perhaps. Chapter 36. Mass Customization and Personalized Production. Good evening. Tonight, we consider a significant shift in the landscape of production: the rise of mass customization and personalized production. This isn't merely about offering different colors of the same product. It's about fundamentally altering the manufacturing process to cater to individual needs, while still retaining the efficiencies we associate with larger-scale operations. Imagine, if you will, a flowing river, initially broad and shallow, representing standardized production, gradually branching into numerous smaller streams, each delivering a uniquely tailored solution. This is the essence of what we're discussing. Recall the familiar concepts of economies of scale, scope, and learning curves. Economies of scale, as we've discussed, refer to the cost advantages that arise from increased production. A larger factory, more efficient machinery, bulk purchasing of raw materials, all these contribute to lower per-unit costs. However, this model often necessitates standardized output. The classical economist, a proponent of efficiency, might argue that deviating from standardization introduces inefficiencies that erode these cost advantages. But the landscape is changing. Mass customization, in its ideal form, allows firms to achieve economies of scale even while catering to individual needs. This requires a fundamental rethinking of the production process, employing modular design, flexible manufacturing technologies, and sophisticated information systems. Think of a clothing company that uses body scanners to create perfectly fitted garments, or a furniture manufacturer that allows customers to design their own sofas online. The core components are produced at scale, benefiting from traditional economies, while the final assembly and configuration are personalized. Economies of scope, another important concept, arise when producing multiple different products within the same firm is cheaper than producing them separately. This is often due to shared resources, technologies, or expertise. Mass customization leverages economies of scope by utilizing flexible manufacturing systems that can switch between different product configurations with minimal disruption. A car manufacturer, for example, might use the same basic chassis and engine platform for a range of different models, customizing the interior, exterior, and features to suit individual preferences. The policymaker, seeking to maximize societal benefit, recognizes that this approach offers a wider range of choices without sacrificing efficiency. The learning curve, as we know, describes the phenomenon where production costs decrease as cumulative output increases due to accumulated experience and improvements in efficiency. In the context of mass customization, the learning curve becomes even more critical. As firms produce more personalized products, they gain a deeper understanding of customer preferences, refine their production processes, and develop more efficient ways to handle variety. This requires sophisticated data analytics and feedback mechanisms, allowing firms to learn from each individual order and continuously improve their ability to deliver personalized solutions. It's a virtuous cycle of improvement, driven by individual interaction. One of the key challenges in implementing mass customization is managing complexity. Offering a vast array of options can overwhelm both the production system and the customer. Too many choices can lead to decision paralysis and dissatisfaction. Therefore, firms must carefully design their product architectures and configure their production processes to strike a balance between personalization and simplicity. The goal is to offer a meaningful range of options without creating unnecessary complexity. Think of a curated selection, expertly guided, rather than an overwhelming buffet. Furthermore, the success of mass customization hinges on seamless integration between the front end and the back end. Customers need to be able to easily specify their preferences and track their orders, while the production system needs to be able to efficiently translate those preferences into physical products. This requires sophisticated information systems, real-time communication, and close collaboration between different departments. It's a delicate dance between customer interaction and efficient production. In conclusion, mass customization and personalized production represent a significant evolution in the economic landscape, a blurring of the lines between mass production and bespoke craftsmanship. They offer the potential to deliver greater customer satisfaction, improve efficiency, and create new sources of competitive advantage. However, they also pose significant challenges, requiring firms to rethink their production processes, invest in new technologies, and develop a deep understanding of customer preferences. As we move forward, we must ask ourselves, how will the rise of artificial intelligence and advanced robotics further transform the landscape of personalized production, and what new economic models will emerge from this fusion of technology and individual demand? Chapter 37. The impact of e-commerce on economies of scale and scope. Good evening. We've considered how e-commerce reshapes market structures, fostering both intense competition and new forms of dominance. Tonight, we turn our gaze inward, examining how this digital transformation ripples through the very fabric of production and costs, specifically concerning economies of scale, scope, and the subtle art of learning curves. Think of it as understanding how the river of digital commerce reshapes the banks of production. Classical economics teaches us that as a firm expands its output, its average costs often decline. This, in essence, is the beauty of economies of scale. Spreading fixed costs. The initial investment in machinery, infrastructure, or, in the digital age, server farms and software development, over a larger number of units reduces the per-unit burden. Imagine a printing press. Whether it prints 1 copy or 1,000, the initial cost of setting it up remains largely the same. E-commerce amplifies this effect in profound ways. The marginal cost of serving an additional customer online can be astonishingly low. Once a website is built, a digital product created, or a logistical network established, serving thousands or even millions, more customers requires significantly less additional investment compared to a traditional brick-and-mortar business. Consider a digital music platform. The initial investment in the platform itself is substantial, but once it's operational, the cost of streaming music to an additional user is practically negligible. This dramatically flattens the average cost curve, allowing e-commerce firms to achieve unprecedented scales of operation. But scale is not the only advantage. Economies of scope refer to the cost savings achieved when a firm produces a range of different, but related, products or services. Again, E-commerce offers distinct advantages here. Data becomes a crucial resource. The insights gleaned from customer interactions, purchase histories, and browsing behavior can be used to tailor product offerings, personalize marketing campaigns, and even predict future demand. This ability to leverage data across multiple product lines or service offerings creates synergistic cost reductions. Think of a large online retailer. They sell not just books, but also electronics, clothing, and groceries. The data they collect on customer preferences in one category can inform their marketing strategies and inventory management in another. This cross-pollination of information reduces marketing costs, improves inventory forecasting, and ultimately lowers the overall cost of serving a diverse customer base. The online environment fosters a constant feedback loop, allowing firms to refine their offerings and optimize their operations across a broad spectrum of products and services. Then we have the learning curve effect. As a firm gains experience in production, its efficiency typically improves, leading to lower costs. This is not merely about scale, but about the accumulation of knowledge and expertise. E-commerce, with its inherent measurability and data-driven nature, accelerates this learning process. A/B testing, data analytics, and real-time feedback mechanisms allow firms to experiment, iterate, and refine their processes at a speed that was simply unimaginable in the pre-digital era. Imagine a software company constantly updating its code based on user feedback and performance data. Each iteration represents a step along the learning curve, leading to a more efficient and user-friendly product. The policymaker, ever vigilant, must consider the implications of these shifts. The enhanced economies of scale and scope afforded by e-commerce can lead to increased market concentration, potentially stifling competition and raising concerns about antitrust enforcement. The classical models, though useful starting points, require careful recalibration in the face of these new dynamics. Furthermore, the rise of digital platforms and the increasing importance of data raise questions about data privacy, security, and access. Striking a balance between fostering innovation and protecting consumer rights is a crucial challenge for policymakers in the digital age. But what happens when these learning curves begin to plateau? When the initial gains from e-commerce are exhausted and the battleground shifts to even more nuanced forms of competitive advantage? What new models of production and cost management will emerge in the next phase of the digital revolution? These are the questions that will occupy us in the coming sessions. Good night. Chapter 38. Sustainability and Environmental Costs, Narrative Landmark. Having explored the fundamental nature of production and cost, we now turn our gaze to the intersection of these economic forces with the vital sphere of environmental sustainability. A consideration, alas, often relegated to an afterthought, but one that is increasingly demanding our immediate and considered attention. The pursuit of economies of scale, scope, and the benefits derived from learning curves has historically been driven by the desire to minimize production costs and maximize profits. This drive, however, frequently overlooks a crucial element: the environmental costs associated with increased production and consumption. These costs, often externalized and borne by society as a whole, represent a significant challenge to long-term sustainability. Consider economies of scale. The classical economist would argue that larger production runs reduced per-unit costs through specialization and the spreading of fixed expenses. Yet, this increased scale often translates into higher consumption of raw materials, greater energy usage, and a larger volume of waste product. The environmental burden, then, rises disproportionately. The pursuit of efficiency, ironically, creates its own inefficiencies in the broader ecological system. The factory churning out goods at record speed is also churning out pollutants, its financial ledger blind to the true cost. Economies of scope, where a firm leverages its existing resources to produce a wider range of products, present a similar paradox. While the sharing of infrastructure and expertise can lead to cost savings, it can also lead to an expansion of environmental impact across multiple industries. The same chemical plant that produces fertilizers might also produce pesticides, each process contributing to environmental degradation in its own unique way. The diversification, while strategically sound, can amplify the collective environmental footprint. The learning curve, with its promise of increased efficiency through accumulated experience, can also have unintended environmental consequences. As production processes become streamlined and optimized, the demand for raw materials might intensify. The pursuit of perfection can lead to a more aggressive exploitation of natural resources. Furthermore, the obsolescence of older technologies, driven by the allure of the learning curve's progress, can generate substantial waste streams, adding to the burden on landfills and recycling systems. The true cost of production, therefore, must incorporate these environmental externalities. Carbon emissions, water pollution, deforestation, and biodiversity loss are not merely unfortunate side effects. They are real costs that must be accounted for in the economic equation. The policymaker, tasked with balancing economic growth and environmental protection, faces a daunting challenge: how to incentivize firms to internalize these external costs. Carbon taxes, emission trading schemes, and regulations mandating environmental impact assessments are among the tools available to the policymaker. These interventions aim to align private incentives with societal goals, encouraging firms to adopt more sustainable production practices. However, the effectiveness of these measures depends on their design, implementation, and enforcement. A poorly designed carbon tax, for example, might disproportionately burden low-income households without significantly reducing emissions. A laxly enforced regulation might simply encourage firms to cut corners, undermining its intended purpose. The transition to a truly sustainable economy requires a fundamental shift in our understanding of production and cost. We must move beyond the narrow focus on financial metrics and embrace a more holistic perspective that incorporates environmental considerations. This requires not only government intervention, but also a change in corporate culture, consumer behavior, and societal values. The business leader must see beyond the quarterly report and consider the long-term impact of their decisions on the planet. The consumer must be willing to pay a premium for environmentally friendly products, and society as a whole must prioritize sustainability alongside economic growth. This shift is not merely an ethical imperative, it is also an economic necessity. As natural resources become scarcer and environmental regulations become stricter, firms that fail to adapt will face increasing risks and costs. Conversely, firms that embrace sustainability will be better positioned to thrive in a future where environmental responsibility is no longer a niche market, but a mainstream expectation. The balance, then, is delicate. We must acknowledge the economic benefits of efficiency and scale, while simultaneously addressing the environmental costs they can engender. It is a dance between progress and preservation, a symphony requiring a conductor who understands the interconnectedness of all things. But as we move to consider how various market structures might shape these interactions, we are left to consider: how might we quantify the value of clean air and water, the price of a lost species, and the true cost of inaction? Chapter 39. Circular Economy and its Implications for Production. Welcome back, friends. We've traversed the landscape of resource allocation, and now, as we settle in, let's gently shift our gaze towards a concept gaining increasing prominence: the circular economy. And within that sphere, how our understanding of production, particularly economies of scale, scope, and learning curves, is fundamentally reshaped. The traditional linear model, a flow of take, make, dispose, has long been the dominant paradigm. Resources are extracted, transformed into products, used, and ultimately discarded. But this model, inherently wasteful and unsustainable, is slowly giving way to a more cyclical perspective. The circular economy seeks to minimize waste and maximize resource utilization by keeping products and materials in use for as long as possible. Now, consider the impact on production. Economies of scale, the efficiencies gained by increasing production volume, have been a cornerstone of industrial strategy. The classical economist, ever seeking efficiency, championed mass production, lowering per unit costs through fixed cost allocation and specialization. But in a circular model, the relentless pursuit of scale must be tempered with considerations of durability, repairability, and recyclability. A short-lived, mass-produced item, while initially cheaper, might impose significantly higher downstream costs in terms of waste disposal and resource depletion. The drive for efficiency isn't abandoned, but its definition broadens. Think of it like a pendulum. We swing from a singular focus on volume to a more balanced approach, considering the entire life cycle. Companies must now factor in the cost of retrieval, refurbishment, and material recovery when evaluating production efficiency. The focus shifts from minimizing costs per unit at the factory gate to minimizing the total cost of ownership for both the producer and the consumer across the product's entire lifespan. Economies of scope, the cost advantages derived from producing a variety of related products, also take on new dimensions in the circular economy. Where previously diversification might have been driven by market expansion or brand extension, now it can be fueled by resource synergy. A manufacturer might, for example, design products that utilize recycled materials from their existing waste streams, or create closed-loop systems where end-of-life products are readily reintegrated into the production process. The benefits of scope extend beyond simple product diversification. They become intertwined with resource efficiency and waste reduction. This requires a systems-thinking approach, a holistic view of the entire value chain. Learning curves, the phenomenon of improved efficiency and reduced costs as production experience accumulates, also find new relevance. In the linear model, learning often focused on optimizing existing processes within a fixed production framework. But in the circular economy, learning extends to mastering new technologies and processes related to material recovery, remanufacturing, and closed-loop design. The policymaker, striving for sustainable development, might incentivize research and development in these areas, accelerating the learning curve for circular production methods. Imagine a manufacturing plant, not simply churning out new goods, but also actively disassembling, sorting, and repurposing materials from returned products. The workforce there would need to acquire new skills, new knowledge of material science, disassembly techniques, and reverse logistics. The learning curve becomes a multifaceted journey, requiring continuous adaptation and innovation. The implications for production are profound. The circular economy demands a shift from a linear, consumption-driven mindset to a more cyclical, resource-conscious approach. It challenges us to redefine efficiency, expand our understanding of cost, and embrace new forms of learning. It asks us to think beyond the immediate product and consider its entire life cycle. The future of production isn't simply about making more. It's about making better, making smarter, and making with greater respect for the finite resources of our planet. A gentle balance, a constant flow, striving towards a closed system. As we consider this new paradigm, what new economic models will arise to fully capture the value inherent in circularity? Will traditional accounting methods adequately reflect the long-term benefits of resource conservation and waste reduction? Perhaps? That is a question for another quiet night. Chapter 40. The Future of Manufacturing, Industry 4, Good evening. We've traversed the landscape of labor, dissected capital, and considered the delicate balance of supply and demand. Now, let us turn our gaze towards the future of manufacturing, a realm increasingly defined by what we call Industry 4. This isn't merely a technological shift. It's a fundamental reshaping of the very concepts of production and costs, particularly as they relate to economies of scale, scope, and the elusive learning curve. Think of it as the culmination of centuries of industrial evolution, flowing towards a point of unprecedented efficiency and adaptability. Consider first the long-held principle of economies of scale. Traditionally, larger production volumes translated directly to lower average costs. The classical economist would champion this, advocating for mass production to amortize fixed costs across a greater output. But Industry 4 introduces a nuanced perspective. While the inherent advantages of scale remain, the emphasis shifts from sheer volume to flexible volume. Smart factories, replete with interconnected machines and data-driven insights, can adjust production runs with remarkable agility. This means smaller batch sizes become economically viable, catering to niche markets and personalized demands without sacrificing cost-effectiveness. The river of production, once a broad, unwavering current, now branches into smaller, more responsive streams. And then there's the concept of economies of scope. This refers to the cost advantages gained by producing a variety of related products within the same firm. Previously, diversifying product lines often entailed significant investments in new equipment and specialized labor. Industry 4, however, fosters a more integrated and modular approach. Imagine a single production line capable of manufacturing a range of products simply by reconfiguring its digital parameters. 3D printing, robotic arms with adaptable tooling, and software-defined manufacturing systems allow for unprecedented flexibility. The factory floor transforms from a rigid structure into a dynamic ecosystem, nurturing a diverse range of outputs. We witness a blending, a convergence of capabilities where boundaries blur, and the lines of what is feasible become increasingly fluid. But perhaps the most profound impact of Industry 4 lies in its acceleration of the learning curve. Traditionally, the learning curve described the gradual improvement in efficiency as workers gained experience and optimized production processes. This was often a slow, incremental journey. Now, with the pervasive use of sensors, data analytics, and artificial intelligence, learning becomes an active, almost sentient process. Every machine, every process, generates a stream of data that can be analyzed to identify bottlenecks, optimize parameters, and predict potential failures. This feedback loop, amplified by machine learning algorithms, dramatically shortens the learning cycle. The factory itself becomes a student, constantly refining its performance and adapting to changing conditions. This continuous learning, this relentless pursuit of optimization, propels efficiency to levels previously unimaginable. Consider a potter throwing clay. Through Industry 4, the wheel learns and guides and ultimately perfects, becoming an extension of the artisan's skill. The policymaker must now grapple with the implications of these shifts. Traditional models of industrial development, predicated on mass production and static economies of scale, may need revision. The focus should shift to fostering innovation, promoting digital literacy, and encouraging the adoption of advanced manufacturing technologies. Investment in research and development, coupled with education and training programs, are crucial to ensure that societies can harness the full potential of Industry 4. It's a delicate balancing act, a constant recalibration to ensure the benefits of this technological revolution are shared equitably. We must ensure that this flowing river of progress does not leave anyone behind. Industry 4, therefore, represents a paradigm shift in how we understand production and costs. It blurs the lines between physical and digital realms, fostering a new era of flexibility, efficiency, and continuous learning. Yet, as we stand on the cusp of this industrial revolution, one question lingers. What will be the next wave of technological advancement? What unseen currents will further shape the economic landscape in the decades to come? What novel forms of production and cost will emerge as we venture deeper into the digital age? Reshoring and the localization of production. Last time, we explored the intricate dance between global supply chains and international trade. Tonight, our focus narrows, honing in on a phenomenon gaining traction in the modern economic landscape: reshoring and the increasing localization of production. This isn't merely a political slogan, it's a re-evaluation of fundamental economic principles, particularly those surrounding production and costs, economies of scale, scope, and the subtle but powerful learning curve. Recall our earlier discussions on economies of scale. The premise is elegant. As production volume increases, the average cost per unit decreases. This arises from spreading fixed costs, the rent, the machinery, the initial investment, across a larger output. Globalization, for many decades, was the ultimate quest for scale. Moving production to regions with lower labor costs allowed firms to produce vast quantities, driving down those average costs and fueling consumer demand. However, this narrative is being challenged. The inherent complexity of globally dispersed supply chains introduces new costs, often hidden beneath the surface. Transportation costs, once almost negligible, have become significant, susceptible to geopolitical instability and fluctuating fuel prices. Supply chain disruptions, once rare, now seem almost commonplace, highlighting the fragility of these extended networks. And the time lag between production and delivery ties up capital, slowing down response times to changing market demands. Localization offers a counterpoint. While it might initially sacrifice some degree of pure scale, it potentially unlocks advantages in other domains. Proximity to the consumer allows for faster feedback loops, enabling quicker adaptation to evolving preferences. Reduced transportation costs and inventory holding costs can offset some of the diseconomies of smaller-scale production. And, crucially, it strengthens resilience against external shocks, offering a more secure and predictable supply of goods. Consider economies of scope. This principle suggests that producing a variety of related goods or services within a single organization can be more efficient than producing them separately. Globalization often led to specialization, with factories dedicated to producing single components that were then shipped across the globe for assembly. Localization allows for a reintegration of production processes, potentially fostering innovation and creating synergistic relationships between different stages of manufacturing. A local ecosystem of suppliers, manufacturers, and designers can cultivate a collaborative environment that is difficult to replicate across vast distances. Then there is the subtle but powerful influence of the learning curve. Each time a task is repeated, it becomes more efficient. Costs decrease, quality improves, and innovation flourishes. Long, fragmented supply chains dilute the learning curve effect. The knowledge gained in one location may not easily transfer to another, and the incentive to invest in process improvements diminishes when production is outsourced. Localization, on the other hand, concentrates expertise and creates a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement. Skilled workers, working in close proximity, can learn from each other, share best practices, and drive down costs over time. However, the shift towards reshoring and localization is not without its challenges. It often requires significant upfront investment in new technologies, automation, and workforce training. And it may necessitate a shift in consumer expectations, with a willingness to pay slightly more for locally produced goods that offer greater security, sustainability, and responsiveness. The policymaker faces a complex, balancing act. Incentivizing reshoring, without resorting to protectionist measures, requires careful consideration. Investing in infrastructure, education, and research and development can create a more attractive environment for domestic production. Supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, the backbone of many local economies, is crucial. And fostering collaboration between industry, government, and academia can accelerate innovation and drive down costs. The classical economists might argue that the pursuit of pure efficiency through global supply chains is paramount. But the reality of the modern world, with its inherent uncertainties and growing awareness of social and environmental costs, suggests that a more nuanced approach is required. Reshoring and localization are not about turning back the clock. They are about creating more resilient, sustainable, and equitable economic systems. As we conclude tonight's discussion, consider this. Are we witnessing a permanent shift in the global economic landscape, a re-evaluation of the trade-offs between scale and resilience, or merely a temporary adjustment in response to recent shocks? And what role will technology play in shaping the future of production, blurring the lines between global and local in ways we can only begin to imagine? Chapter 42. Geopolitical Factors Affecting Production Costs. Yes. We were contemplating the delicate dance of production costs, weren't we? The beautiful interplay of economies of scale, economies of scope, and the subtle, persistent power of learning curves. These forces, internal to the firm, shape the very contours of a company's cost structure. But the world, as we know, is rarely confined to the internal. Tonight, let us consider the broader, more turbulent ocean in which these firms swim, the geopolitical landscape, and how its currents profoundly affect the costs of production. Think of it like a terrarium. We might meticulously control the temperature, humidity, and nutrient levels within, optimizing the growth of our miniature ecosystem. But if a hurricane were to sweep across the region, shattering the glass and disrupting the delicate balance, all our internal efforts would be rendered, at least temporarily, moot. Geopolitics, in its essence, represents those external forces that can dramatically alter the economic climate. One of the most immediate impacts is on the cost of raw materials. Consider, for example, a manufacturer of electric vehicles. Their costs are intrinsically linked to the availability and price of lithium, cobalt, and rare earth minerals. Should a political crisis erupt in a region rich in these resources, supply chains become strained, prices surge, and the manufacturer's production costs inevitably increase. This isn't merely a matter of fluctuating prices. It's a disruption of the very foundation upon which their production is built. Trade agreements, or their unfortunate dissolution, wield similar power. The implementation of tariffs, even seemingly minor ones, can ripple through the global economy, impacting the cost of intermediate goods and ultimately the final product. A seemingly isolated policy decision by the policymaker in one nation can have cascading effects on producers thousands of miles away. Consider also the subtle but significant influence of political stability. A nation grappling with civil unrest, corruption, or weak governance presents a far less attractive environment for investment and production. The risks are higher, the regulatory landscape more unpredictable, and the potential for disruptions much greater. This translates directly into higher costs. Companies operating in such environments must often factor in the expenses of enhanced security, insurance, and navigating complex bureaucratic hurdles. The classical economist might argue that these are merely externalities, but for the firm on the ground, they are very real and very tangible costs. Furthermore, geopolitical tensions can impact transportation costs. The specter of conflict, particularly in strategic waterways or choke points, can dramatically increase shipping rates and insurance premiums. The Suez Canal, for instance, a critical artery of global trade, is always vulnerable to geopolitical instability. Even the threat of disruption can send ripples through the supply chain, forcing companies to seek alternative, often more expensive, routes. This, in turn, erodes the benefits gained from economies of scale, the ability to produce goods at a lower cost per unit as production volume increases. If you can't reliably and affordably transport those increased volumes, the advantage vanishes. Moreover, intellectual property rights, or the lack thereof, are deeply intertwined with geopolitical considerations. Companies investing heavily in research and development rely on strong IP protection to recoup their investments and maintain a competitive edge. However, in regions where enforcement is lax or non-existent, the risk of counterfeiting and intellectual property theft is high. This forces companies to invest in costly measures to protect their innovations, effectively increasing their production costs. It can also dissuade them from investing in those regions altogether, limiting their potential to exploit economies of scope, the cost advantages gained by producing a wider variety of goods or services. And let us not forget the subtle impact on learning curves. A stable and supportive political environment fosters long-term investment in worker training and skill development. This allows companies to climb the learning curve more quickly, becoming more efficient and reducing costs over time. Conversely, political instability and uncertainty can discourage such investments, hindering the accumulation of knowledge and experience, and slowing the descent down the learning curve. So as we see, the economic garden is influenced not only by the internal cultivation, but also by the winds and storms of the world. The cost function of a firm is not merely a mathematical equation. It's a complex tapestry woven from internal efficiencies and external realities. And the strands of geopolitics are undeniably intertwined within that tapestry. But as the global landscape continues to shift, as new alliances form and old rivalries resurface, how can businesses best navigate these turbulent waters? What strategies can they employ to mitigate the geopolitical risks and maintain their competitive edge? These are questions we shall explore in our next contemplation. Until then, may your economic slumber be peaceful. Chapter 43. Measuring the effectiveness of cost reduction strategies. The pursuit of cost reduction is a fundamental driver in the competitive dance of firms. However, the mere attempt to cut costs is insufficient. Rigorous measurement is essential to determine whether these efforts are truly bearing fruit, leading to sustained profitability and improved efficiency. Our focus here will be on the interplay between cost reduction strategies and the economic principles of economies of scale, scope, and the learning curve. Tools that, when understood, act as powerful lenses through which to analyze effectiveness. Economies of scale, that siren song of increased production leading to lower per unit costs, are often a primary target for cost reduction initiatives. To assess the effectiveness here, one must move beyond simple comparisons of total cost. The crucial metric is the average total cost. Has the ATC demonstrably decreased as output has increased, holding other factors constant? A careful examination of cost curves, those elegant, sweeping lines, is paramount. Are we truly operating on the downward sloping portion of the ATC curve? Or have we unwittingly ventured into the territory of diseconomies of scale, where increased complexity and coordination costs begin to outweigh the benefits? Regression analysis, controlling for factors like inflation and technological change, offers a statistical rigor to this inquiry. Then there is economies of scope, the synergistic advantage gained by producing multiple products or services within a single firm. Measuring the effectiveness of scope-related cost reductions requires a more nuanced approach. We must consider whether the combined cost of producing goods A and B within one firm is less than the cost of producing them separately in two distinct firms. This is often assessed through cost allocation studies, which attempt to accurately distribute shared resources and overhead across different product lines. If synergy truly exists, we should observe a reduction in allocated costs per unit for each product, compared to a hypothetical scenario of independent production. The classical economist, observing a firm producing both widgets and gadgets, would ask, are the shared resources, the management expertise, the distribution network, truly being leveraged to reduce the overall cost burden on each product? Or are they merely creating bureaucratic bloat, masking inefficiencies? The learning curve, a powerful and often underestimated driver of cost reduction, represents the accumulated knowledge and improved efficiency gained through repeated production. As workers and processes become more adept, costs decrease, often predictably. Measuring the effectiveness of learning requires tracking the cumulative output and the associated direct labor costs. A learning curve is typically depicted as a downward sloping line, where each doubling of cumulative output leads to a consistent percentage reduction in labor cost per unit. If the learning curve is flattening, it signals that the potential for further cost reduction through experience alone is diminishing, prompting the need for more radical innovations or process redesigns. We must be mindful, however, that the learning curve is not a guarantee. It requires active effort to capture and codify knowledge, to proactively improve processes, and to avoid complacency. Beyond these core principles, broader financial metrics provide crucial context. Profit margins, return on investment, and break-even points all offer valuable insights into the overall effectiveness of cost reduction strategies. A reduction in costs that doesn't translate into improved profitability or enhanced shareholder value is ultimately a hollow victory. The policymaker, concerned with the health of the overall economy, would also examine the impact of cost reduction strategies on employment and wages, ensuring that efficiency gains are not achieved at the expense of social well-being. It's crucial to remember that cost reduction is not a static exercise, but an ongoing process of optimization. Regular monitoring, data analysis, and adaptation are essential to maintaining a competitive edge. Consider the role of technology, automation, data analytics, and artificial intelligence in further accelerating the learning curve and unlocking new avenues for cost reduction. These tools can provide real-time insights into production processes, identify bottlenecks, and optimize resource allocation, leading to more effective and sustainable cost management. The effectiveness of such technologies, of course, must also be rigorously measured, ensuring that their implementation yields tangible benefits. The effectiveness of cost reduction is not solely a matter of numbers, it is also about culture. A culture of continuous improvement, where employees are empowered to identify and implement cost-saving measures, is far more likely to achieve lasting success than a top-down dictatorial approach. Fostering a collaborative environment where knowledge is shared and innovation is encouraged is paramount. Chapter 44. Ethical Considerations in Pursuit of Efficiency. The allure of economies of scale, scope, and learning curves is undeniable. They promise a world of abundance, of resources stretched further, and costs driven ever downward. Like a river, finding the most efficient channel to the sea, businesses are naturally drawn towards these forces. But just as a river can erode its banks or flood the valley floor, the pursuit of economic efficiency is not without its ethical currents and potential for unforeseen consequences. Consider economies of scale, the reduction in average cost achieved by increasing the scale of production. The large factory, humming with activity, churning out goods at an unprecedented rate. It is a monument to this principle. Yet, this monument is often built upon the foundations of specialization and standardization. As tasks become more narrowly defined, the worker, once a craftsman with a holistic understanding of the product, can be reduced to a cog in a machine. The fulfillment derived from creating something from beginning to end diminishes, replaced by the monotony of repetitive action. This raises ethical questions about the value of labor, the dignity of work, and the potential for alienation in the modern workplace. Furthermore, the concentration of economic power that often accompanies large-scale production can lead to imbalances. The classical economist, with their emphasis on free markets, might argue that such imbalances are temporary, corrected by competitive forces. But history offers a more nuanced perspective. Dominant firms, wielding their market power, can exert undue influence on pricing, innovation, and even government policy. The small business owner, the entrepreneur with a novel idea, can find themselves struggling to compete against giants, their potential stifled by the very system that purports to reward innovation. Economies of scope, the efficiencies gained by producing a range of related products or services, present their own set of ethical challenges. While diversification can benefit consumers by offering greater choice and convenience, it can also lead to what some might call scope creep, a blurring of boundaries between distinct industries, potentially creating conflicts of interest. A financial institution, for example, offering both investment advice and underwriting services, may face the temptation to push its clients towards investments that are beneficial to the institution, even if they are not the best choice for the client. Transparency and ethical conduct become paramount in such situations. The learning curve, the phenomenon where productivity increases and costs decrease as workers become more experienced, presents a more subtle ethical dilemma. While fostering continuous improvement is undoubtedly a positive goal, it can sometimes be pursued at the expense of worker well-being. The relentless pressure to optimize processes, to eliminate inefficiencies, can lead to increased stress and burnout. The policymaker, tasked with balancing economic growth with social welfare, must consider the human cost of progress and implement policies that protect workers from exploitation. Moreover, the benefits of learning curves are not always distributed equitably. Those who are initially employed may reap the rewards of increased wages and job security, while those who are excluded from the learning process may find themselves left behind. Training and education become crucial tools for ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to participate in the economic benefits generated by learning and innovation. Ultimately, the pursuit of efficiency must be tempered with a deep sense of ethical responsibility. The principles of justice, fairness, and compassion must guide our decisions as we strive to create a more prosperous and equitable world. We must remember that economic progress is not an end in itself, but a means to an end, a means to improving the lives of all members of society. The river flows onward, carving its path through the landscape. But what lies beyond the horizon? What new economic forces will shape our future, and what ethical challenges will they present? The next chapter awaits, promising further exploration of the complex interplay between economics and morality. Chapter 45, Conclusion. The enduring importance of cost management as we've traversed the intricate landscape of economic principles. From the foundations of supply and demand to the complexities of market structures, we arrive at a natural conclusion, a point of reflection on the enduring significance of cost management. It is a fitting capstone, for the control of costs forms the bedrock upon which successful enterprises are built, and ultimately, upon which societal prosperity rests. Our discussions on production and costs have been illuminated by the concepts of economies of scale, scope, and the learning curve, each a distinct, yet interwoven thread in the grand tapestry of economic efficiency. Economies of scale, you'll recall, represent the reduction in average costs that occurs as a firm increases its production volume. This is not merely a matter of buying in bulk, though that certainly plays a role. It extends to the spreading of fixed costs, the rent on a factory, the salary of a CEO, across a larger number of units. The greater the volume, the smaller the burden of these fixed costs becomes on each individual item. Imagine a potter working alone in a small studio. The rent on the studio, the cost of the kiln, these are fixed. Now imagine a large pottery factory producing thousands of identical vases. While the total rent is higher, the cost per vase is dramatically reduced. That, in essence, is the power of scale, a principle that drives much of modern industrial production. Economies of scope, on the other hand, explore the cost advantages that arise from producing a variety of goods or services. This differs fundamentally from economies of scale, which focus on the sheer volume of a single product. Scope is about leveraging shared resources and expertise across different product lines. A company that manufactures both cars and trucks, for example, might benefit from shared research and development, common marketing campaigns, and a unified supply chain. The synergistic effects can be substantial, leading to lower overall costs than if each product line were managed independently. Consider a software company. Initially, it develops a word processor, but it then leverages the existing code base, the established programming team, and the market awareness to create a spreadsheet program. The cost of developing the second program is significantly lower than if it had started from scratch. This is the essence of scope, the broadening of horizons through strategic diversification. Finally, the learning curve highlights the cost reductions that occur as a firm gains experience in production. It is a phenomenon deeply rooted in human nature. As we repeat a task, we become more efficient, more skilled, and more adept at identifying and eliminating bottlenecks. This applies not only to individual workers, but also to entire organizations. As a company produces more and more of a particular product, it learns how to streamline processes, optimize workflows, and improve quality control, all of which contribute to lower costs. Think of a watchmaker, painstakingly assembling intricate timepieces. The first watch might take days, even weeks, to complete. But with each successive watch, the watchmaker's speed and precision improve. The movements become smoother, the steps more instinctive. Over time, the cost of producing each watch steadily declines. This, my friends, is the profound effect of learning, a constant drive toward efficiency and mastery. These three concepts, scale, scope, and learning, are not merely theoretical constructs. They are practical tools that managers can use to improve their firm's competitiveness and profitability. By understanding and harnessing these principles, companies can achieve a sustainable cost advantage, allowing them to offer lower prices, invest in innovation, and ultimately, create more value for their customers. The classical economist recognized the power of scale in agricultural production. The policymaker seeks to create an environment where firms can freely expand and innovate, reaping the benefits of scope and learning. The entrepreneur, ever vigilant for opportunities, leverages these principles to disrupt established industries and create new markets. As we conclude this journey, it is important to remember that cost management is not simply about cutting corners or squeezing suppliers. It is about optimizing processes, fostering innovation, and creating a culture of continuous improvement. It is about recognizing that resources are scarce, and that every dollar saved is a dollar that can be reinvested in future growth. Our understanding of these concepts provides a solid foundation for further exploration. But as we move forward, we must also consider the ethical dimensions of cost management. How do we ensure that our pursuit of efficiency does not come at the expense of workers, communities, or the environment? What role does regulation play in balancing economic growth with social responsibility? As the next chapter unfolds, we will begin to explore these important questions, recognizing that economics is not simply about numbers, but about the choices we make and the values we uphold.